the object that shouldn't exist. It began as a flicker, a faint deviation in a telescope's field of view, so subtle that most systems would have discarded it as static or cosmic dust. Yet Dr. Lena Moretti, senior astrophysicist at the European Southern Observatory, paused when she saw it. The light signature didn't behave like a comet. It didn't scatter sunlight in the broad, predictable pattern of ice and rock. Instead, it pulsed, not continuously, not randomly, but in an irregular rhythm that hinted at intent, a broken heartbeat buried within the dark silence of space. The object, officially designated 3I divided by Atlas, had been categorized months earlier as a harmless interstellar visitor, another fragment drifting from beyond the heliosphere, joining the handful of known interstellar bodies that had passed near Earth. Its orbit was calculated, its composition estimated, and its press coverage short-lived. But when Lena compared new data from Mauna Kea and Cerro Tololo observatories, the differences were impossible to ignore. The object's albedo had changed. Its surface brightness had doubled, then tripled, as if it were reacting to something. She recalibrated the instruments, convinced it was a software fault. Yet even after multiple checks, the readings held steady, a persistent luminescence pattern modulated by an unknown process. In her private notes, she wrote a single question that she dared not include in the official report. What if it's not reflecting light? What if it's emitting it? Days later, the anomaly grew. 3I divided by Atlas began shedding faint fragments that trailed behind it like glowing spores. Observatories across the world recorded the event with quiet fascination. The fragments moved oddly, not dispersing like debris, but maintaining relative positions, as if held by invisible tethers. Astronomers described it as gravitational clustering, but Lena saw something more precise. Each piece drifted within a fixed distance, adjusting minutely as though obeying a shared rule. Debris doesn't do that, she whispered to herself as she watched the simulation replay. In her email inbox, a private message arrived from an old colleague at the Subaru Observatory in Hawaii. It contained a single attachment, a spectral analysis chart of the fragments. The peaks were wrong. They showed metal signatures, alloys with high reflectivity uncommon in natural bodies. There were traces of titanium, even hints of organized lattice structures. Her colleague wrote only 3 words beneath the data. They look built. For 3 nights, Lena couldn't sleep. She replayed the data, her mind spiraling through every rational explanation: instrumental error, optical illusion, atmospheric interference, but none fit. When she finally drafted her findings for internal review, the system refused to accept her upload. A red banner appeared on screen. Restricted classification. Data channel closed. Moments later, she received a call from an anonymous number. A calm male voice spoke without greeting. Dr. Moretti, your current research file on Atlas 3I is to remain unpublished. All subsequent findings must be transmitted through the European Space Authority liaison only. Do you understand? Who is not Farade? She tried to ask who was speaking, but the line clicked dead. Elsewhere, in Chile, at the Paranal Observatory, a young technician noticed similar interference. Telescope logs were skipping entries. Frames that should have contained continuous recordings showed minute-long blackouts, replaced with corrupted timestamps. When he tried to restore them, the system crashed. Minutes later, his supervisor received an email marked confidential from the European Space Authority, instructing immediate data isolation. The pattern was spreading, and no one knew why. Weeks passed, and the global astronomy community began to murmur. Atlas had brightened beyond prediction, glowing faintly even to the naked eye under dark skies. Amateur astronomers uploaded time-lapse videos showing strange glints darting near the object's path, like metallic motes reflecting sunlight. Online forums buzzed with speculation. Microsatellites, unknown technology, secret probes. Then came the first radar anomaly. NASA's Deep Space Network reported a return signal delay inconsistent with Atlas's projected trajectory. Something in its vicinity was reflecting radio waves more efficiently than rock or ice should. The reflected pulses displayed modulation, a slight, rhythmic distortion, almost like an echo trying to repeat what it heard. Lena was among the few who connected the pieces. She compiled the light curves, the radar discrepancies, and the fragment data into one file, naming it simply Pattern 001. She ran a frequency analysis of the object's brightness variations, and found harmonic resonance at intervals that matched Earth's orbital rotation. It was as though the object knew when it was being observed. When she presented her findings to her director, he glanced at the charts, frowning deeply. "You can't release this," he said. "Not without authorization." "Authorization from who?" she asked. He hesitated. "From the people funding this observatory, and they're not interested in theories that make us sound like science fiction writers. But the data." "Forget the data," he snapped. "Sometimes the safest discovery is the one left unspoken." That night, Lena backed up her files to a private drive and hid it beneath a false panel in her desk. She had the distinct feeling that her observatory was no longer entirely her own. Security staff she'd never met began patrolling at night. Servers were taken offline for updates. Her email access was restricted to internal communication only. One evening, she lingered in the dome as the telescope rotated toward Atlas's coordinates. The feed flickered, then stabilized. The object glowed faintly on the screen, its fractured tail stretching across the dark. Then, something new appeared, a shimmer near the nucleus, a faint outline moving independently from the debris. She increased exposure time, adjusting filters. Slowly the shape resolved. Angular, symmetrical, and faintly illuminated. It wasn't natural. Her heart pounded as she captured 3 frames before the system froze. The image distorted, the screen dissolving into static. When the feed returned, the object was gone. Minutes later, a message appeared on her terminal. "Session terminated. Unauthorized recording attempt detected." The observatory's lights dimmed. Somewhere outside, a door slammed. Footsteps echoed in the hallway, slow and deliberate. She turned off her monitor, backed away from the console, and whispered into the dark, "What are you?" Outside, above the frozen desert air, the sky burned with silent light. 3I divided by Atlas continued its steady drift through the void, a scarred wanderer shedding fragments like seeds. And among those fragments, invisible to most telescopes, now under lock and key, something moved. Not tumbling, not drifting, but steering. Something that should not exist. The silenced observatory. The orders came down quietly, as they always do when truth becomes dangerous. No press releases, no official memos, just whispered directives filtering through hierarchies, disguised as technical protocol updates. Within 48 hours of Dr. Moretti's discovery, the Mauna Kea and Paranal observatories, 2 of Earth's most advanced eyes to the cosmos, were effectively blindfolded. It began innocuously, a firmware patch. Technicians received instructions to install an urgent calibration fix for the adaptive optics systems. The patch was encrypted, distributed from a secure European server, and required administrative privileges to execute. Within hours of installation, network connections went down. Local data caches were locked behind new credentials that no one at the facilities possessed. At first, the staff believed it was a technical oversight. Then the men in suits arrived. At Mauna Kea, they came before sunrise, 3 unmarked black SUVs pulling up to the gated perimeter, their headlights slicing through the mist. They didn't wear badges or insignia, only laminated passes with a single symbol, a stylized spiral that no one recognized. They carried military-grade storage drives, escorted by local law enforcement, who avoided eye contact with the astronomers. The facility director, Dr. Yates, tried to protest. "You can't just take our primary servers offline without clearance. The data belongs to..." "The people who paid for your instruments," one of the men interrupted smoothly. "We're here under ESA authorization. It's a routine data transfer for security compliance." "Security compliance?" Yates echoed. "For what? It's a telescope, not a weapons lab." The man smiled faintly. "All observation data pertaining to 3I divided by Atlas is now classified under international coordination. You'll receive further instructions once analysis is complete." With that, the men began disconnecting systems, sliding hard drives into protective casings. The astronomers could only watch. The hum of cooling fans died one by one, and with them, the live feeds gone in seconds. At the same time in Chile, a similar scene played out at Paranal. Only this time, someone resisted. A young systems engineer named Arturo Reyes refused to hand over the redundant backup server. He had noticed the anomaly days before the missing timestamps, the corrupted entries, and had secretly mirrored the raw data onto an isolated local drive. It wasn't much, only 20 hours of observation logs, but it was enough to show something deliberate had been removed. When the security team arrived, Arturo slipped the drive into his jacket. "I'm not giving you anything without documentation," he said, trying to sound calm. The leader of the operation, a tall woman with dark gloves and an expression of perfect indifference, tilted her head slightly. "Mr. Reyes, your compliance isn't optional." He hesitated, pulse hammering. "I'm an employee of ESO, not a—" She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You're a contractor, and contractors can be replaced." That night, Arturo left through a maintenance exit, the drive hidden beneath his shirt. He drove without headlights down the desert road, the distant glow of the Atacama fading behind him. In the distance, the stars shone brilliantly, and among them, one glimmer seemed to move. Back in Hawaii, the observatory's main control room was sealed under restricted access. Researchers were sent home indefinitely, their credentials suspended pending cybersecurity verification. Within days, a hush fell over the global astronomical community. Threads discussing Atlas anomalies vanished from professional forums. University departments received polite but firm requests to redirect their focus to approved observation targets. Yet whispers persisted. At Caltech, a graduate assistant named Rami Patel noticed something strange in archived data. Frames taken just hours before the observatory shut down contained faint trails, dozens of them emerging from Atlas's tail like diverging streams. Each one displayed micro-fluctuations in brightness, almost like controlled propulsion bursts. When he tried to access the full-resolution files, his login failed. The directory had been renamed ESA, Protected Divided by Locked. He took screenshots before the system could refresh. The next morning, he received an email from his department head, advising him to focus on coursework for the time being. It wasn't a suggestion. Across the world, scientists began noticing similar patterns: funding freezes, data loss, unexplained reassignment. Teams working on the Atlas project were merged into unrelated studies. Cloud servers containing shared telescope data were emptied overnight. An administrator at the European Space Data Center described it best in an encrypted message that later leaked onto a private forum. "It's as if the sky itself has been censored." Meanwhile, the object continued to approach perihelion, its brightness fluctuating in erratic bursts. Public observatories could no longer track it. Live data feeds redirected to processing nodes that returned static placeholders. To the general public, Atlas had simply dimmed, outshone by more accessible cosmic events. But amateur astronomers, those without institutional ties, began to see otherwise. A group of skywatchers in Argentina captured images showing small, luminous dots moving parallel to the comet's trajectory, each separated by precise intervals. "Like pearls on a string," one of them described. Within days, their footage was flagged for copyright violation and removed from every platform it appeared on. Lena Moretti, now confined to administrative duties at her observatory, received a printed note slipped under her office door. "They silenced the sky. You were right. Check Mauna Kea logs. 3:14 GMT. That timestamp haunted her. She accessed what little remained of her data cache and found a partial frame taken minutes before her system had frozen weeks earlier. The image was incomplete, corrupted across most of the field, but in one surviving quadrant, a faint triangular silhouette glowed against the black. It wasn't drifting like debris. It was aligned, symmetrical, deliberate. She ran a luminosity filter, adjusting brightness until the background interference cleared. The object shimmered faintly, its edges sharp and geometric. A drone, a vessel, no natural formation fit the shape. Its surface reflected light unevenly, as though composed of segmented panels. When she saved the frame, her workstation crashed. The file vanished. Moments later, her office phone rang. She didn't answer. She stared at it, as it rang a second time, a third, the sound mechanical and cold. Then it stopped. Outside her window, the observatory domes gleamed faintly in the moonlight. For the first time in her career, she felt that the heavens were not vast enough to make her feel safe. Across the Pacific, in a control bunker beneath Canberra, an emergency meeting of the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance was underway. Grainy satellite footage from independent sources had revealed something extraordinary. Multiple unidentified objects in high suborbital trajectory, positioned between Earth and Atlas's inbound path. They were not meteors. Their movement was deliberate, controlled. A general leaned forward, his voice grave. "Are we saying these things are artificial?" No one answered. "Then who built them?" he demanded. A civilian consultant, an astrophysicist brought in under sealed contract, finally spoke. "That's the problem, sir. If they didn't come from here, they came from there." The room fell silent. By dawn, every active observatory capable of tracking Atlas was placed under new cooperative protocols. Funding boards were restructured. All data pertaining to Interstellar Object 3I divided by Atlas was classified under an umbrella project named Helios Defense Coordination Initiative. Not favorable to the public, the object was still a harmless comet, fading, unremarkable. But in darkened labs and encrypted channels, the truth spread like static. The telescopes had not malfunctioned. They had been silenced. And somewhere in the void, beyond the reach of any instrument now allowed to see, something built by no known hand continued its slow descent toward Earth. The observatories had been blindfolded, and the world, unknowingly, had been left to watch the sky without eyes. The hidden transmission. It started as a whisper in the static, the kind of anomaly that radio astronomers have trained themselves to ignore. Background noise, they called it. Cosmic interference. But one young researcher at the Reykjavik Array, a small independent listening post operating outside major government networks, noticed that this particular whisper had rhythm, not random, not chaotic, but patterned as though something beyond the veil of stars was repeating itself, trying to be heard through the cosmic noise. Her name was Elin Arnardottir, and she wasn't supposed to be listening to Atlas. The array's funding was meant for monitoring solar wind fluctuations, but curiosity has always been a more powerful force than funding. When Elin cross-referenced a week of radio logs against the orbital path of 3I divided by Atlas, she found the same burst of low-frequency energy appearing every 19 hours and 14 minutes, almost to the second. At first, she thought it was a malfunction, perhaps interference from military satellites or geomagnetic resonance. But when she filtered the signal, its structure emerged. It wasn't continuous noise. It was a series of repeating spikes, 3 short, 1 long, then a pause, followed by a descending tone that faded into the background hiss. Elin played the recording aloud, over and over, feeling a chill crawl across her skin. It sounded too deliberate. She ran the signal through a fast Fourier transform, analyzing its harmonic structure. What emerged stunned her. The frequency spikes weren't random at all. They formed mathematical intervals, ratios close to Fibonacci sequences. Nature loved patterns like these. But this wasn't nature speaking in waves and winds. This was precision. She sent her findings to a colleague at the University of Oslo, an old mentor who had once told her that the universe hums, but sometimes it sings. He replied within hours, "Record everything. Do not upload to public servers. They will notice." By they, Elin didn't know if he meant officials or something else. But the warning was enough. She saved her recordings to analog tape, sealing them in metal boxes lined with copper foil to block radiation. For 3 nights, she continued recording. Each burst came exactly as before, identical to the millisecond, until the 4th day when the signal changed. The new burst was louder, cleaner, and unmistakably structured. The spikes now mirrored the pattern of Earth's sidereal rotation. Atlas was not just broadcasting, it was tracking. That night, a low hum filled the control room. The instruments vibrated, slightly at first, then with a frequency that rattled the panels. Lights flickered. The radio spectrograph began printing unreadable lines of distorted code, each filled with symbols no standard data processor could translate. Elin stared at the printer feed as characters poured out half numbers, half something else, an alphabet she didn't recognize. And then, among the chaos, a sequence repeated, 314159, pi, an impossible message, embedded in cosmic noise. She tried to upload the data to the International Radio Astronomy Network, but her connection timed out. Every attempt failed. The satellite uplink blinked red. Then, a message appeared across the system interface. Transmission, blocked, classified bandwidth. Classified? The Reykjavik array was independent. No classified channels existed there. Moments later, her phone buzzed. A message flashed briefly before auto-deletion. "Stop broadcasting. They're listening." The next day, 2 unmarked aircraft landed at a nearby airstrip. The local paper reported it as a military calibration mission. But Elin watched from the observation tower as the men unloaded strange black equipment, tall cylinders with antennae that crackled faintly in the cold air. They positioned them around the array, like a perimeter. She approached one of the technicians, asking for identification. The man smiled politely but did not answer. His badge bore no flag, only the same spiral insignia that had appeared on the men who shut down Mauna Kea. By nightfall, the Reykjavik array had gone dark, but Ellen wasn't there. She had already fled her analog tapes hidden beneath the floorboards of an abandoned signal shed in the hills, where she once tested microwave receivers as a student. She carried only her notebook, filled with transcribed sequences from the first transmissions. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the world, other ears had begun to hear the same thing. In a research station on the outskirts of Perth, a retired radio engineer named Jiro Tanaka had been scanning the same frequency range for signs of deep space interference. When he picked up the repeating burst, he thought it was Morse code, but no Morse operator could maintain such mathematical precision. He slowed the playback speed, turning digital chirps into low, haunting tones. The result was unsettling. The signal sounded like breathing. Within a week, small observatories across the globe began detecting the same pattern. From Argentina to South Africa, the whispers in the static were identical. Even amateur ham radio operators caught traces, uploading their findings to obscure online forums. The posts didn't last long. Each thread was deleted within hours. Accounts vanished. Still, fragments survived: screenshots, partial spectrograms, decoded ratios. All pointed to the same terrifying conclusion. The signal wasn't spreading outward. It was narrowing, converging, focusing toward one destination: Earth. Lena Moretti, isolated and increasingly paranoid after being sidelined from her observatory, discovered the transmissions through a contact in Norway who had managed to save one spectrogram before deletion. When she plotted it against Atlas's orbital data, the alignment was perfect. Each pulse coincided with the object's rotation, as if the signal was a beacon, scanning across the solar system in a rhythmic sweep. But there was something else. A subharmonic frequency nested within the main signal. It wasn't visible unless you inverted the waveform. When she did, she froze. It was human, a voice, faint, distorted, buried under layers of noise, repeating something over and over in what sounded like English. Not debris, coordinates, release, confirm. Her breath caught. It wasn't a transmission from the comet. It was a conversation. Someone, somewhere, was talking to Atlas. She enhanced the audio, isolating syllables, filtering through a dozen iterations. The voice grew clearer, until one word emerged distinctly, resonating through her headphones like a ghost. Awaken. At that exact moment, her power went out. The monitor flickered, the lights died, and the hum in her office grew louder than before, a deep, physical vibration that seemed to pulse through the floor. She stood frozen as dust drifted from the ceiling. Then, as quickly as it came, the vibration ceased. The building was silent again, save for the whisper of wind outside. When power returned minutes later, her workstation rebooted to a blank screen. The file containing the signal analysis was gone, so were her backups. But on her desktop, a new text file appeared. Do not listen again. She stared at it for a long time before deleting it. In the days that followed, news reports began mentioning magnetic disturbances and unexplained radio outages across several continents. Communications, satellites experienced short, simultaneous downtimes. Aviation systems briefly lost calibration. None of it made sense to the public, but Lena and the few others who had glimpsed the hidden transmission understood what it meant. Something was activating. The signal was not just a message, it was a command. And whatever 3I divided by Atlas had carried with it across the interstellar void, whatever fragments it had released into the black, were now listening. The silence of the observatories was no longer about secrecy. It was containment. And containment, Lena realized, never lasts forever. The night of shadows. The first night came quietly, cloaked in calm skies and the deceptive peace of ordinary darkness. There were no auroras, no storms, no cosmic warnings, just a soft blanket of night draped across the continents. But for those who were awake, listening, watching, and remembering, the silence carried weight. It was the same silence that had preceded the first surge, the same stillness that had once crawled across the oceans before the water rose as one. Only this time, it was not the sea that would stir, it was the sky. In Reykjavik, Lena sat by her window, her notebook open, her pen hovering motionless above a half-finished line. The air felt heavy. The hum had returned faint, low, threading through the bones of the building like a whisper made of stone. Outside, the aurora flickered, though no geomagnetic storms had been forecast. The lights pulsed in a pattern that made no natural sense. 3 flashes, pause, 1 long shimmer, repeating again and again. She counted the rhythm. It matched the transmission Aylin had recorded before her array was silenced. Elsewhere, across the northern hemisphere, similar lights appeared. In Alaska, faint emerald curtains shimmering where no auroras should exist. In Scotland, strange silver streaks cutting across the sky. Over Canada, a wave of blue light rolled silently eastward, vanishing beyond the Atlantic. Meteorologists blamed solar wind anomalies, though solar observatories detected none. At 2:14 GMT, the power grid across parts of northern Europe flickered. GPS signals went out for exactly 71 seconds. Commercial flights lost altitude readings. Autopilot systems disengaging. Ships drifting near the Norwegian coast reported their compasses spinning wildly before realigning. In the confusion, no one noticed the pattern. In each case, the disturbances occurred when 3I divided by Atlas passed directly overhead. Lena's pulse quickened as she scrolled through archived satellite feeds. Every pass aligned perfectly, but something else chilled her blood. Faint streaks of movement accompanying the comet's shadow. They were not natural trajectories. They were angular, precise, controlled. She enhanced one frame, filtering out background interference until the image sharpened. A faint triangle glided across the blackness, light flickering along its edge. Behind it, smaller points followed in formation, 6, maybe 7 of them, like a constellation moving with purpose. She whispered to herself, "They're not fragments, they're machines." Down in the Atacama Desert, Arturo Reyes watched similar phenomena from his hidden outpost. He had spent months decrypting the backup data he had smuggled from Paranol, rebuilding frame sequences that had been wiped from every official record. When he finally managed to compile a complete image, his hands trembled. The objects were identical to Lena's triangular silhouettes flanking the comet, their edges faintly glowing. But these were closer, much closer. In the infrared spectrum, they emitted heat signatures inconsistent with debris. They were powered. He cross-referenced timestamps and found something impossible. One of the triangular objects had changed position, accelerating briefly before stabilizing, not orbiting, not drifting, maneuvering. At 3:06 GMT, across the globe, amateur astronomers began to notice flashes near Atlas. Videos surfaced online, flickering bursts of light reflecting from what appeared to be metallic surfaces. Some thought it was a new meteor shower. Others joked about UFOs. Within hours, the posts vanished. The accounts were deleted. But by then, the damage was done. The public had seen too much. Number Atlas drone began trending on social media. Dozens of amateur skywatchers streamed their observations live, only for their feeds to go dark one by one. In the United States, an emergency meeting was convened at NORAD. Satellite footage from the previous 12 hours revealed unidentified craft entering low orbit, faint, unregistered, traveling along the comet's trajectory. Military analysts at first assumed they were surveillance devices from foreign powers, but their motion defied propulsion logic. No thrusters, no exhaust trails. They moved in arcs too smooth, too deliberate. By 4:17 GMT, the world's defense networks were on silent alert. In Japan, radar systems detected transient objects descending briefly into the upper atmosphere before vanishing. Over the Pacific, radio operators reported strange echoes, signals bouncing back not from the ocean or sky, but from something invisible above. Then came the blackout. At precisely 4:33 GMT, every major observatory connected to the Helios network went offline. Not gradually, not by interference all at once. Systems failed in perfect synchronization. Live feeds froze mid-frame. Lena's own observatory terminal displayed a single phrase before shutting down. Shadow protocol engaged. She had never seen the term before. She searched her files, but the system was already rebooting. When it returned, access was denied. She reached for her backup drive, the same one she had hidden since the first silencing, and connected it to an isolated terminal. Her hands shook as she loaded the encrypted logs. They contained fragments of radio spectra, light curves, and positional data from 3I divided by Atlas's latest pass. But buried within the metadata, she found a note, one she hadn't written. It was dated 2 hours into the future. When they descend, they will not appear as invaders. they will appear as reflections. Her heart stopped. She checked the timestamp again, 6:21 GMT. The message had been inserted remotely. Thousands of kilometers away, in Iceland's fjords, fishermen reported seeing floating stars above the horizon, points of light that hovered silently, reflecting on the black water. They assumed them to be aircraft until one of the lights dipped, touching the sea's surface, sending ripples across the calm. Then it rose again and vanished without sound. Similar reports came from Alaska, Siberia, and Norway. Lights gliding silently over snowfields, leaving trails of shimmering ionized air. In rural Canada, a family filmed a glowing object passing low over a frozen lake, the ice fracturing beneath it as if struck by invisible pressure. The video lasted 12 seconds before static consumed it. By dawn, governments worldwide issued official statements denying the authenticity of any such footage. Natural optical phenomena, they claimed, auroral reflections, atmospheric plasma. But none of those explanations accounted for what followed. On the night of March 12th, at 23:58 GMT, the International Space Station detected a cluster of unidentified signals rising from Earth's surface. Hundreds of them. They moved upward, forming a lattice of faint blue trails visible for only minutes before disappearing into the atmosphere. The crew on board recorded them through the cupola window. The footage was confiscated before broadcast. Lena received a copy through an anonymous channel 2 days later. It showed streaks of light ascending from multiple locations: oceans, deserts, mountain ranges. She enhanced the frames until her stomach turned. The streaks were not ascending debris, they were answers. Something on Earth had responded to the transmission. Her mind reeled. Could it be ancient probes, dormant mechanisms waiting for the resonance signal? She remembered the phrase from the mysterious file, "They will appear as reflections." Reflections of what? She opened the footage again, this time isolating the blue wavelengths. What emerged sent her trembling. Each ascending trail curved toward a single point, the path of 3I, divided by Atlas. Whatever had been released from the comet wasn't descending. It was calling home. At 1:41 GMT, the final stage of the event unfolded. Across the globe, night skies filled with faint geometric shadows, hexagonal grids shimmering faintly like invisible netting across the stars. Ground-based telescopes, still functional in some private observatories, captured them for only seconds before interference scrambled the feeds. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the phenomenon ceased. The auroras faded, power grids stabilized, the hum vanished. The next morning, news outlets described it as a planetary-scale magnetic inversion event. Scientists dismissed eyewitness reports as hysteria caused by geomagnetic disorientation. But those who had seen the patterns, the hovering shapes, the synchronized movement, the unnatural silence, knew it wasn't a storm. It was a rehearsal. Lena sat in her darkened office, watching the pale dawn creep across the sea. Her hands ached from writing. On the page before her, she had scrawled a single question. If they are reflections, what are we reflecting? Her thoughts drifted to the first spectral anomalies, the hidden transmissions, the censored telescope logs. Every piece formed a single, terrible pattern, one that seemed to echo from the cosmos itself. The drones weren't exploring Earth, they were remembering it. And somewhere above, in the thinning edge of the atmosphere, something unseen moved, tracing coastlines, scanning the oceans, its faint light mirrored on the waves below. Humanity still called them drones. But in the silence of that long night, the truth became harder to ignore. They were not here to invade. They were here to awaken what had been left behind. And the night that followed would not be known for its darkness, but for the shadows it revealed. Echoes in the sky. For weeks afterward, the world tried to pretend the night of shadows had never happened. Governments called it an ionospheric anomaly, the result of solar interference interacting with the atmosphere. The news cycles spun technical jargon and assurance. People wanted to believe it. They needed to believe it. But those who had watched the sky that night, the fishermen on the fjords, the pilots over the Atlantic, the children who saw blue light spill across their windows, knew better. They had seen something deliberate, something alive. In Reykjavik, Lena couldn't sleep. Every night she would walk to the cliffs where the old lighthouse still stood, its beams sweeping over a coastline that had once been stable and certain. The air carried the same uneasy vibration she remembered from the longest night. Subtle, almost inaudible, yet present. She'd started recording again using analog devices, just as Ellen had done months before the silencing of her array. Digital systems were compromised. She knew that now. Whatever or whoever controlled the data channels could erase anything faster than she could think to preserve it. The tapes hummed. The sky hummed. Even the sea seemed to echo with that same subharmonic tone. One morning, while replaying her recordings through an old oscilloscope, she noticed something that made her hands go cold. The waveform pulsed in perfect alignment with Atlas's orbital window. But this time, the intervals were not random. They formed a sequence of rising and falling frequencies that mapped, when plotted spatially, into a spiral, a near-perfect logarithmic spiral. She froze. The same spiral had been embossed on the identification badges of the men who had shut down the observatories months earlier. Coincidence was no longer a reasonable explanation. Elsewhere, in the Atacama Desert, Arturo Reyes had made similar progress. From his hidden lab, he tracked faint bursts of microwave radiation emanating not from the comet itself, but from the points of atmospheric disturbance that had appeared during the Night of Shadows. Each emission followed a pattern, an echo of the same harmonic sequence Lena had recorded. When he compared his results to historical seismic data, he realized the emissions coincided with regions of the Earth that had experienced unexplained magnetic disturbances going back decades. It was as if the planet itself had been seeded with dormant nodes, silent until the signal from Atlas had awakened them. He wasn't alone in his suspicions. Across the world, independent scientists and radio amateurs began noticing the same spectral anomalies. A private research team in Mumbai found low-frequency echoes beneath the ionospheric layer, signals that reflected upward, not downward, suggesting that Earth's upper atmosphere had become a resonant shell. They called it the sky mirror effect. When their findings leaked online, the internet lit up with speculation. Theories bloomed like wildfire. Secret weapons testing, interdimensional communication, alien recall technology. The most viral post came from an anonymous account claiming access to the Helios network. The post contained a single image, a world map overlaid with a grid of glowing nodes, the same locations Arturo had identified from his radiation logs. Beneath it, 3 words were written: "The echoes have begun." Within hours, the account was deleted. Lena printed the image before it vanished and pinned it above her desk. The grid was not random, it followed major fault lines, oceanic trenches, and ancient tectonic boundaries. The echoes were not simply electromagnetic, they were geological. The Earth itself was responding. At first, the manifestations were subtle. Fishermen off the coast of Greenland reported strange magnetic pull on their compasses. Air traffic over the Pacific encountered turbulence that instruments couldn't predict. Even migratory birds began flying erratically, deviating thousands of kilometers from their usual routes. Then the sounds began. Across Iceland, Norway, and northern Canada, people heard them: low, resonant hums reverberating through valleys, vibrating glass windows, setting metal fences quivering. Some described it as a cosmic trumpet, others as the planet groaning. Scientists dismissed it as atmospheric pressure oscillation, but recordings proved otherwise. The frequencies were too structured, too consistent. When Lena compared one of the recordings to her own data, she realized the horrifying truth. The Earth was reproducing the same harmonic sequence that Atlas had emitted months earlier. It wasn't just echoing it, it was singing it back. She contacted Arturo through encrypted channels. Their correspondence was brief but urgent. "Lena, it's not interference. The frequency pattern is geological. The crust is resonating." "Arturo, I know. The pulses align with seismic hotspots." "Lena, do you think they're trying to communicate?" "Arturo, no. I think they're syncing." He sent her a compressed file containing topographical renderings of the latest satellite data. When she opened it, she gasped. Along the coastlines, especially near fault zones, faint, luminous lines had begun appearing, bioluminescent in nature, visible from orbit as glowing veins tracing the planet's wounds. At first, scientists thought it was chemical discharge or volcanic plankton blooms, but spectroscopy proved otherwise. The glow emitted in frequencies matching the Atlas pulse. The oceans, it seemed, were remembering the song too. Meanwhile, whispers of the Helios initiative began surfacing in leaked documents. Anonymous insiders claimed that the silencing of the observatories had been a desperate containment measure, not to hide aliens, but to prevent global panic over a revelation humanity wasn't prepared to face. Atlas, they said, was not a comet. It was a carrier, an interstellar seed probe, releasing autonomous drones to reawaken a network buried deep within Earth's structure. According to one file, written in the dry language of military science, node activation sequence aligns with deep mantle harmonics. Estimated global synchronization, 32 months from initial pulse. Containment not feasible. Prepare for atmospheric resonance event. Lena read the line again and again. Atmospheric resonance event. It sounded sterile, almost academic, but she knew what it meant. The Earth's entire system, ocean, crust, atmosphere, was being tuned like an instrument. One night, she climbed to the cliffs again, her tape recorder in hand. The sky above was eerily clear, the stars sharp and unblinking. Atlas still hung there, smaller now but pulsing faintly with its fractured light. As she stood listening, the ground beneath her vibrated softly, not an earthquake, not the wind, but a pulse, a deep, slow rhythm echoing through rock and sea. She pressed her hand to the ground and felt it. The earth was breathing, and above her, the aurora shimmered again, blue this time, brighter than before. The light rippled across the heavens like a living thing, bending and folding as if responding to the pulse below. The ocean mirrored it, every crest flashing silver blue, every trough humming in answer. The air smelled of ozone and salt. The sky seemed to pulse in time with her heartbeat. She raised the recorder and whispered into it, her voice trembling. Echoes in the sky, echoes in the sea, echoes beneath our feet. The song is returning. As if in response, a single bright point of light detached itself from the constellation above. It moved, not falling, not drifting, but descending in a slow, deliberate path toward the horizon. She watched until it disappeared beyond the ocean, leaving behind a faint trail that shimmered like liquid metal. In that moment, Lena understood that the world was no longer waiting for contact. Contact had already happened. It was ongoing, continuous, mutual. The sky, the earth, and the sea were no longer separate. They were one body resonating with the same ancient note, the same forgotten harmony. And though humanity still clung to the illusion of control, the truth echoed above them in endless waves. Something older than civilization was awakening, and it remembered the sound of its creators. The awakening grid. By early autumn, the world was no longer the same, though few dared to say it aloud. Cities still stood, governments still broadcast calm assurances, and satellites still blinked obediently in the dark. But beneath the thin veneer of order, the planet had begun to hum in ways that instruments couldn't quite quantify, and that human beings couldn't ignore. The grid, the vast invisible network of Earth's magnetic and geological lifelines, was no longer dormant, it was awake. In Reykjavik, Lena had begun to feel it physically. The hum wasn't just a sound anymore, it was a presence, a vibration that lived under the skin. She would wake at night with her heart racing to a rhythm she didn't understand, her pulse syncing unconsciously with something larger, slower, more deliberate. Sometimes, she thought she heard whispers threaded through the silence between each pulse, fragments of a language not meant for human mouths. At first, she believed the sensations were a result of exhaustion, of too many sleepless nights spent staring at oscilloscopes and spectral graphs. But then, her instruments began to move on their own. The analog needles, she trusted the same ones, immune to digital interference, started to sway rhythmically, even when disconnected from power. She wrapped them in copper shielding, stored them in sealed boxes, yet still they quivered, as if answering to a current that ran through everything now. And it wasn't just Iceland. Reports came from across the northern hemisphere of strange electrical phenomena. Compasses spun without magnetics. Streetlights flickered in perfect unison across entire cities. In the deserts of Nevada, plasma discharges erupted spontaneously from the ground, illuminating the night with electric tendrils that crawled over sand like living veins. Arturo Reyes had relocated to the Chilean highlands, following the trails of luminous nodes his instruments had detected weeks before. There, among the mountains scarred by centuries of seismic restlessness, he found what he had been searching for, a location where the resonance converged. It wasn't a place of human construction, at least not in any recognizable sense. He described it later in his encrypted notes as a geometry in the earth. The site was nothing more than a field of cracked basalt, yet under certain frequencies, the ground emitted faint light, like moonlight trapped beneath glass. When he struck a tuning fork calibrated to 19.14 Hz, the same bass harmonic found in Atlas's first signal, the light responded, brightening and shifting in pattern. He moved around the field, mapping the glow, until he realized it formed a lattice of interlocking hexagons that extended far beyond his equipment's range. He called it the grid. The discovery spread quietly through encrypted channels shared among independent scientists and rogue engineers. The grid appeared not only in Chile but also in Siberia, Antarctica, and beneath the Indian Ocean geological structures that mirrored each other across the globe. They weren't artificial in the traditional sense. Their formation seemed both natural and impossibly precise, as though the Earth itself had grown them in anticipation of something. When Lena received Arturo's data packet, she didn't believe it at first, but then she compared his findings to seismic tomography models, 3D maps of the planet's mantle created from decades of earthquake data. The grid was there too, hidden in plain sight. Not physical lines, but resonance pathways, zones of equal frequency that formed a network connecting continents through the deep rock. It wasn't a construction, it was a conduction. She wrote in her notebook, "The Earth is not being invaded, it is being reactivated." Governments, meanwhile, struggled to contain what they called the resonance hysteria. Entire regions began reporting mass insomnia, synchronized dreams, and inexplicable fainting episodes at identical hours across different time zones. People awoke, speaking fragments of unknown languages, claiming to see geometric patterns etched into the air when they closed their eyes. Hospitals filled with patients whose heartbeats pulsed in rhythmic alignment with recorded data from seismic sensors. But denial could not last forever. When magnetic north began to drift 30 times faster than predicted models allowed, even the most skeptical institutions could no longer dismiss it as coincidence. By late October, power grids across northern Europe fluctuated wildly. Engineers described it as invisible interference, though the pattern matched the oscillation frequency of Atlas's emissions. Aircraft reported instruments going dark for seconds at a time, and in the waters south of Greenland, sonar arrays began to detect strange anomalies rising from the seafloor columns of metallic echo, smooth and vertical, stretching kilometers high before fading into the current. Arturo was one of the first to identify what these echoes meant. The grid was not confined to land. It extended beneath the oceans, forming colossal resonant pillars where tectonic plates met. The seafloor itself had become a singing structure. Meanwhile, Atlas, though now dimmer, continued to pulse. Its once chaotic emissions had stabilized into steady intervals, slow, deliberate, like the ticking of a clock. The timing of each pulse corresponded precisely to the increase in Earth's magnetic resonance. The planet wasn't just responding, it was synchronizing. At the Reykjavik Institute, where Lena had once been dismissed as a fringe researcher, the remaining staff began to notice anomalies in local atmospheric readings. Clouds above the city sometimes froze in place, static for minutes before resuming motion. Birds circled endlessly without migrating south for winter. Even the auroras had changed, no longer random curtains of light, but deliberate spirals radiating from points along the horizon. Then came the first direct evidence that the grid was conscious, or at least aware. It began as a series of radio pings, picked up by an old deep-sea buoy system in the North Atlantic. The signals were faint, rhythmic, and coded in patterns resembling sonar. When decoded using harmonic analysis, the results stunned everyone who saw it. A three-dimensional geometric structure that mirrored Atlas's own fractured form. It was as if the ocean itself was transmitting a reflection of the comet. Lena replayed the decoded sequence through a frequency synthesizer, converting the tones into sound. What came out was unlike any natural signal. It was layered, almost melodic, a deep choral vibration that seemed to expand outward until the entire lab vibrated in resonance. The walls hummed, the windows trembled, and her own voice was swallowed by the sound. She realized then what the echoes had meant. The grid was not being activated by Atlas, it was answering to it. The drones, the so-called fragments orbiting the comet, were not weapons or probes, they were conductors, instruments designed to tune planets like strings across a cosmic instrument. Every world Atlas had visited had likely been given the same song. Arturo's last transmission confirmed this fear. Using seismic records and old planetary radar data, he found evidence that similar resonance patterns existed on Mars, beneath the frozen plains of Europa, even within the dense clouds of Venus. The frequencies matched within 1,000th of a hertz. Earth, it seemed, was merely the latest to join the orchestra. But the most chilling discovery came a week later, when one of the Reykjavik satellites, one of the few still operational, recorded an outgoing signal, not incoming. For the first time, Earth had transmitted back into deep space, broadcasting the resonance outward in all directions. When Lena analyzed the signal, her heart nearly stopped. It wasn't random noise, it was structured. Encoded within the wave was a pattern identical to the one Elin had discovered months before, the Fibonacci progression, the spiral of life itself. But this time, it wasn't a question being asked. It was an answer, and embedded within it was a pulse, a countdown. No one could yet decipher what it counted toward: an alignment, perhaps, or an arrival. But the intervals were shortening, the rhythm quickening, as if the grid itself were eager to complete its synchronization. For the first time, Lena felt genuine fear, not of invasion, but of culmination. She stared out at the midnight horizon, the sea glowing faintly with bioluminescent veins, the auroras swirling in deliberate arcs above. The world was no longer passive, it was aware, alive, and listening to a memory billions of years old. Somewhere beyond the stars, something had sent Atlas to remind the Earth of its part in that forgotten song. Now, the planet was singing back, and though no one yet knew what the final chord would bring, Lena understood one terrible truth. Every note of the awakening grid brought humanity one step closer to being heard. The signal beneath, the hum that had begun in the sky, was now echoing from beneath the Earth. It came softly at first, like the low murmur of wind through stone, an ancient vibration that could be felt more than heard. But as the weeks passed, it deepened, reverberating through the mantle, resonating in oceans, cities, bones. It was no longer an atmospheric whisper, it was the heartbeat of the planet itself. Beneath Reykjavik, Lena's instruments began registering microseismic events, unlike any she had seen before. The tremors were weak in magnitude, yet impossibly consistent, each pulse repeating at the same interval, 19.14 seconds apart. It was the same frequency Arturo had discovered in the Chilean highlands, the same note emitted by the field of glowing basalt. But these were not isolated. They were global. Deep Earth monitoring stations across continents began reporting synchronized pulses traveling through the crust. What unsettled the scientific community was not the quakes themselves. They were too faint to cause harm, but their coordination. The waves were moving not randomly, but in unison, circling the planet in precise loops like sonar waves mapping the interior of the Earth. And then came the patterns. When Lena plotted the data over time, she saw something impossible. A geometric formation emerging from the seismic records, triangular at first, then hexagonal, expanding outward until it resembled a vast crystalline web encircling the entire globe. It was the same structure Arturo had seen etched into the Earth, the same lattice Lena had found hidden in the auroral spirals. The grid wasn't just awakening, it was alive. In the Atacama, Arturo had gone deeper. He and a handful of colleagues, engineers, seismologists, and one linguist had excavated a fissure near the luminous basalt field. The crack had widened since his first visit, revealing a cavern system glowing faintly with blue bioluminescent minerals. But this was no ordinary geological formation. The light pulsed. Arturo recorded it carefully, noting how the intensity increased whenever 3I divided by Atlas passed overhead. He played the frequency data through a spectrum analyzer, and froze when the translation revealed a pattern that looked eerily familiar. It was language. Not human, not even terrestrial, but structured repeating sequences that suggested intent. He transmitted the data to Lena, who spent 3 sleepless nights comparing the light intervals to the comet's emission logs. When she overlaid the two, the alignment was perfect. The signals from the cavern were not echoes of the comet. They were responses. It was as if the Earth itself were speaking back to Atlas through the planet's bones. The revelation was too much for most institutions. Governments dismissed it outright, citing instrumental errors and mass data misinterpretation. But the evidence continued to mount. Across the globe, similar caverns began to appear. In Russia's Sakha Republic, miners discovered tunnels glowing with the same strange light, the rock smooth as glass, humming with low vibrations. In the Yucatan, divers found submerged sinkholes that pulsed faintly at night, their waters shimmering like liquid mirrors. And then, in early November, the first drone returned. It came not from the sky, but from beneath the Pacific. Fishermen near Easter Island captured footage of a massive angular shape emerging from the water in silence. It was not mechanical in the traditional sense. Its surface appeared organic, like liquid metal shaped into geometry. It hovered for minutes above the ocean, droplets of seawater cascading from its surface in slow, weightless arcs. Then, with a low-frequency hum that made compasses spin, it vanished back into the depths. Military satellites picked up the disturbance but failed to track it once submerged. Oceanographic sensors reported shock waves traveling through the seafloor for hours after the sighting. When plotted, the waves formed the same hexagonal grid pattern that had been seen in seismic data. The grid was no longer theoretical. It was moving. Arturo called Lena through a secure line. His voice trembled. "They're not visitors," he said. "They've been here all along, buried, waiting." "For what?" she asked. "The signal. The resonance is their wake-up call." "Then what's the purpose?" "To complete the circuit." He sent her a video feed before the call disconnected. It showed the Chilean cavern, now brighter than ever, its walls rippling with light like a living organism. Shapes moved beneath the surface, silhouettes shifting and folding, like veins carrying luminous currents. The entire chamber seemed to breathe. In Reykjavik, Lena's seismic instruments began to fail one by one, their sensors overwhelmed by constant vibration. She switched to analog, recording the resonance through physical mediums, spools of magnetic tape, copper plates etched with oscillations. She felt the hum through the soles of her feet, a slow pulse traveling upward, steady and inevitable. Then the lights began. Across the globe, regions that corresponded to the grid's nodal intersections began glowing faintly at night. Satellite imagery revealed a lattice of faint blue veins spanning continents, pulsing in time with Atlas's emissions. Oceans shimmered as if threaded with fire. Cities near these nodes experienced electromagnetic anomalies. Phones died, compasses reversed polarity, and timekeeping devices desynchronized. The planet had become an instrument, each region a note in a melody no one could hear in full. In the scientific underground, a chilling theory took root. The resonance wasn't just a form of activation, it was a transfer. Energy, data, perhaps even consciousness, moving between the comet and the planet through the grid. Some speculated that Earth had been seeded as part of an ancient experiment, a network of planetary minds connected across light years, each one awakening in sequence as Atlas passed near. Others went further, claiming that Atlas was not a comet at all but the decaying remnant of a vast interstellar organism, its drones fragments of neural architecture scattered across systems, reawakening the worlds it had once touched. Lena didn't know what to believe, but as she replayed the seismic waveforms one night, she noticed something terrifying. The pulses were changing. Their intervals were shortening. 19.14 seconds became 18, then 17, then 16. Each reduction coincided with a flare from Atlas. The rhythm was accelerating. She calculated the rate of change and froze. If the pattern continued, the resonance would reach harmonic convergence, complete synchronization between Earth and Atlas in less than 3 months. And that, she realized, was the countdown encoded in the outbound signal. The world was not being destroyed. It was being rewritten. Every tectonic shift, every pulse of the ocean, every shimmer in the auroras was part of a reconfiguration process, a planetary awakening guided by the memory encoded within the comet's fractured song. She remembered the phrase left in her data months earlier. They will appear as reflections. Now she understood. The drones, the grids, the lights, they were not foreign intrusions. They were reflections of Atlas itself, mirrored in the matter of the Earth, as if the planet were becoming an extension of the comet's body. And beneath her feet, the signal grew stronger. On December 2nd, a deep tremor shook the Atlantic ridge. Unlike any earthquake before, it emitted a pure tone audible across vast distances, an infrasound so low it bypassed the ear and went straight to the body. People collapsed from nausea in Lisbon and New York at the same instant. Animals fled coastlines. Whales surfaced in confusion, beaching themselves in coordinated waves. The tone lasted 7 minutes. When it ended, seismographs recorded silence, not calm, but absence. Every instrument worldwide went still for precisely 90 seconds. No movement, no noise, as though the Earth itself had paused to listen. Then the hum returned, deeper and slower than before, reverberating from the planet's core like a single, sustained note of completion. Lena stood in her darkened lab, feeling the pulse through the floorboards. Her voice was barely a whisper when she said, "It's begun," because in that moment she realized the terrible truth. The signal beneath wasn't a message. It was a command, the pulse of rebirth. By the time December reached its midpoint, the Earth was no longer a silent observer of the cosmos. It had become a participant. The planet's pulse, once invisible, imperceptible, now rippled through every ocean current, every tectonic boundary, every nervous system capable of feeling. The resonance had deepened into something far more complex, a rhythm of rebirth. From space, satellites captured something extraordinary. The world glowed faintly in the dark, not with city lights or storms, but with threads of luminous energy stretching across continents, weaving an intricate network of veins that pulsed in synchrony. Each node shimmered briefly, then dimmed, like a neuron firing in the brain of something vast and awakening. Those who still studied the phenomenon called it the pulse. Others, with a mix of awe and dread, called it Earth's heartbeat. In Reykjavik, Lena no longer needed her instruments to know when the next pulse would come. She could feel it in her body, the way her breath slowed just before each wave of vibration moved through the air, how her fingertips tingled with static when it passed. It was as if the human nervous system had been drafted into service, wired directly into the growing symphony of the planet's new rhythm. At first, she resisted it, terrified of what it meant. But gradually, the resistance gave way to fascination. Every time the pulse moved through her, she sensed patterns hidden within it, sequences of tones, layered harmonics, fragments of something that resembled meaning. It wasn't chaotic, it was deliberate, and it was expanding. She filled pages with notations, converting frequency spikes into symbols, mapping each pattern onto planetary coordinates. When plotted on a map, the results defied reason. The pulse wasn't random, it was constructing. The luminous veins that spread across the Earth weren't natural fault lines. They were deliberate designs forming geometric constellations that mirrored the comet Atlas's trajectory through the solar system. It was as though Earth were imprinting the memory of the wanderer upon itself. Meanwhile, in Chile, Arturo's team had vanished. Their last transmission came from a research camp near the Andean fissure. The video feed was chaotic, earth-shaking, equipment rattling, lights flickering. Amid the noise, one of his colleagues screamed that the cavern light had intensified, that it was responding to something beneath them. The last thing Arturo said before the feed cut out was a single phrase: "It's hollowing." For weeks, Lena tried to reach him. No signal ever returned. Then, on December 21st, the Solstice satellites picked up a massive electromagnetic anomaly centered on the same coordinates as the Chilean site. For 40 seconds, an energy spike greater than any recorded volcanic eruption erupted from the Earth's crust, shooting a beam of ionized plasma straight into the upper atmosphere. The color was unlike any aurora deep sapphire, with streaks of silver and white. When it dissipated, the sensors detected something impossible. A perfect circular cavity, nearly 2 kilometers wide, had formed beneath the surface, its edges fused into glass. Whatever had happened there, it wasn't an explosion. It was precision. Lena replayed the event data again and again, comparing it to Atlas's emission logs. The timing was exact. The comet had pulsed moments before the Earth responded. It was a dialogue. The scientific community could no longer deny it. Even those who had clung to skepticism began whispering the same conclusion behind closed doors. The Earth was communicating, but communicating with what and why remained a question that tore at the fragile sanity of those who dared to ask. Around the world, phenomena multiplied. In Siberia, entire forests began to emit low-frequency vibrations, trees bending and straightening in perfect rhythm, their roots glowing faintly through frost. In the Pacific, dolphins and whales altered their migration routes, converging toward regions where oceanic resonance was strongest. Deep-sea hydrophones captured haunting songs echoing in frequencies matching the pulse complex, layered and seemingly intelligent. Some marine biologists speculated that life itself was responding, that biology had always been part of the grid, dormant until the resonance reawakened it. Others were less poetic. Military analysts warned that these bioresonant phenomena posed existential risks. Ecosystems shifting in synchrony could destabilize global weather, magnetism, even planetary rotation. They demanded containment. But how do you contain the heartbeat of a planet? By late December, fear had spread faster than any scientific paper. Global communication networks, already weakened by interference, collapsed entirely for hours at a time during major pulse events. Aircraft grounded themselves. Power stations overloaded and melted down. Satellites failed to maintain orbit, their gyroscopes spinning uncontrollably as if the laws of inertia themselves had changed. Human civilization was beginning to fracture under the weight of an awakening Earth. And yet, amidst the chaos, patterns of beauty emerged. In Iceland, entire fjords began to glow at night, their waters illuminated from below by bioluminescent organisms synchronizing perfectly with each planetary pulse. Lena watched as the ocean breathed light with each wave, as if inhaling the sky and exhaling stars. She realized then that this was not destruction, it was synchronization. The Earth was tuning itself to a higher order of resonance, aligning with something beyond comprehension. The pulse wasn't an attack, it was a transformation. But transformation rarely comes without cost. On the first day of the new year, a network of seismic observatories reported a sudden change in the resonance signature. The intervals shortened dramatically. What had been minutes between pulses became seconds. The frequency increased, and with it, the energy. Across the world, gravity itself seemed to fluctuate by imperceptible degrees. Pendulums drifted out of sync, clocks ticked faster, then slower. Time itself appeared to stutter. Lena, exhausted but lucid, wrote in her notebook, "The planet is no longer bound to its old rhythm. It is rewriting its temporal code." A few days later, a global blackout struck. The cause was never officially identified, but Lena knew. The pulse had reached saturation. For 6 hours, the planet plunged into darkness. No power, no signal, no orbiting satellites. Only the glow of the atmosphere, rippling in ghostly blue arcs, remained. During that blackout, people across continents reported seeing visions, hallucinations. Some said of colossal structures emerging from the horizon, towers of light reaching skyward. Some claimed they saw beings of pure luminescence walking through the fields. Others described voices calm, melodic, speaking in tones that transcended words. In Iceland, Lena experienced her own vision. Standing atop the cliffs, she saw the sea part not physically, but as a shimmer of energy, revealing beneath the water what looked like an immense pattern etched into the ocean floor, concentric rings, glowing brighter with every heartbeat of the earth. At their center was motion, a spiral, coiling outward like a living thing awakening from sleep. Then she felt it, not fear, not awe, but recognition. It wasn't alien. It was familiar. The resonance, the light, the rhythm, it all felt like something humanity had forgotten, something encoded in the bones of the planet itself. The pulse was not new, it was memory returning. The Earth was remembering what it once had been, a vessel of connection, part of a vast network of worlds bound by sound and energy, by harmony instead of distance. Atlas had not brought that memory. It had merely reminded the planet of its place in the cosmic symphony. The rebirth was underway, and as the first dawn of the new year broke, a pale, trembling light spreading over oceans that shimmered like mirrors, Lena felt the pulse move through her, one last time before fading into silence. For a brief, impossible moment, she heard it clearly. Not a hum, not noise, a voice. It whispered in a tone that resonated through her bones, across the cliffs, into the waiting sea. The seed remembers its origin. Then the world exhaled. The pulse subsided. The light dimmed. The oceans calmed. But the silence that followed was not peace. It was anticipation, the breath between movements in a symphony not yet finished. And far above, in the cold black of space, Atlas turned once more, its fractured core flickering with the dim, steady light of purpose fulfilled. It had completed the awakening, not of a planet, but of a memory, one that now pulsed quietly within every grain of earth. The pulse of rebirth was over. The next phase was about to begin, the memory code. When the pulse finally quieted, a strange peace settled across the planet, uneasy, shimmering, and deceptive. The seas lay still, the skies glowed faintly at night with residual energy, and for the first time in months, seismic instruments around the world recorded silence. Yet every scientist who survived the chaos knew it was not the silence of rest. It was the silence of assimilation. The Earth had changed not merely in shape, but in nature. Its magnetic field had stabilized into a pattern never before observed. Satellite reconstructions, pieced together from surviving data, revealed that the planet's poles no longer aligned with geographic north and south. Instead, they had shifted to new coordinates, forming a precise geometric axis that corresponded to the comet Atlas's orbital plane. In other words, Earth was now oriented to the same rhythm as the Wanderer. For those who watched the skies, it was like seeing a clock hand lock into its destined position. And as the alignment solidified, the world began to reveal what it had become. Lena was one of the first to notice the code. In the aftermath of the pulse, She returned to the Reykjavik Institute, or what was left of it. The building had survived the quakes, but not the abandonment. Equipment was scattered, walls cracked, ceilings leaking from the frost. She moved through the silent halls with a generator-powered lamp, listening for echoes of memory. When she reached the laboratory, her eyes fell upon the analog recorders she had left running during the blackout. Against all odds, they had survived. Spools of magnetic tape lay coiled in metal reels, each filled with the vibrations of the Earth recorded at the height of resonance. For hours, she played them back through an old oscilloscope, tracing the waves on screen. At first, they appeared chaotic, dense clusters of peaks and valleys, meaningless noise, but as she slowed the playback, her heart began to race. Hidden within the static were repeating shapes, curves folding into spirals, arcs intersecting in perfect symmetry, fractal geometries that expanded infinitely inward. She exported the data into a spectrographic analysis tool and layered it with the planet's electromagnetic maps. The result was undeniable. The pulse had left an imprint, a digital fingerprint of light and sound embedded within the Earth's magnetic field. And when she translated the frequencies into visual code, she found something more chilling, an ordered sequence of repeating bands, alternating in harmonic proportion. It wasn't random, it was binary. The Earth had recorded something. Lena spent sleepless nights decoding it, converting frequencies to numbers, numbers to patterns, patterns to shapes. Slowly, the signal took form, a circular design composed of interlocking rings and vectors radiating outward like petals. Each section contained intricate internal markings like a language of geometry. At first glance, it resembled an ancient mandala, but when overlaid with planetary coordinates, it became something else entirely, a map. It pointed to 12 regions across the globe, specific locations where the grid intersected most strongly with the newly aligned magnetic field. Each node corresponded to one of the world's tectonic pressure points: the Andes, the Himalayas, the Rift Valley, the Arctic Circle, the deep trenches of the Pacific. Arturo's field in Chile had been one of them. The pulse, it seemed, had awakened these sites deliberately, as if activating a series of buried archives scattered throughout the planet. Lena realized then that Earth was not merely remembering, it was communicating its memory. The code wasn't a message to humans, it was a planetary archive reassembling itself. When she uploaded fragments of the spectrographic data to the few surviving research networks, responses came quickly and fearfully. A physicist in Kyoto reported that his lab's residual plasma samples, collected during the blackout, had crystallized spontaneously into patterns identical to Lena's decoded mandala. A biologist in Kenya wrote that certain coral species exposed to post-pulse ocean currents were growing in geometric spirals never seen before. A linguist in Quebec even discovered rhythmic patterns embedded in whale songs that mirrored the frequency modulation of Lena's recordings. Everything was connected. It became impossible to deny that the Earth's ecosystems, its waters, its air, even its DNA, had absorbed the resonance. Evolution itself had been rewritten in real time, but there was more. On the night of January 19th, Lena received a transmission she had not expected. It came through one of the few operational deep space radio arrays in Norway. The station's automated system, running on solar reserve, had captured a faint inbound signal 3 days earlier. The frequency matched the pulse. At first, Lena assumed it was residual interference, but when she applied the same harmonic filter she had used on the magnetic recordings, the noise resolved into structured sound, layered tones, arranged in ascending intervals, mathematically precise, almost melodic. She converted it into a spectrogram, and her breath caught. It was the same mandala, only this one was different. The central ring was missing. In its place was a void, an empty space surrounded by shifting patterns. She realized what it meant. The code was incomplete. The pulse had transmitted half of a memory. The other half was returning, carried on frequencies rebounding from the edges of the solar system. The Earth had sent out a signal during the alignment, and now something or someone was responding. But the message was not only light. It was instruction. Every node in the grid began to vibrate again, faintly at first, then stronger. The oceans shimmered with renewed light. In the deserts of Australia, strange symbols appeared overnight, etched into the sand by wind and heat, forming geometric arrangements visible only from above. They matched the mandala's outer rings exactly. The Earth was preparing for something, perhaps the completion of its reconfiguration. Meanwhile, small anomalies began to appear in orbit. Satellite debris that should have decayed began to move in unnatural trajectories, forming clusters that mirrored the 12 grid nodes on Earth. Astronomers whispered of artificial constellations assembling around the planet, though no government claimed them. Lena suspected the truth. The fragments of 3I divided by Atlas were returning, drawn toward the magnetic resonance like iron to a lodestone. Each shard, once thought to be inert debris, carried within it a part of the same code, like scattered neurons reuniting into a single consciousness. The world's remaining governments, fractured and fearful, responded with panic. Missile silos were armed, naval fleets deployed, and global broadcasts warned of unknown orbital phenomena. But their weapons meant nothing. The pulse had disabled guidance systems, corrupted satellite data, and rendered conventional communication unreliable. For all humanity's technological power, the Earth had quietly taken control of its own systems. And through it all, Lena continued decoding, driven by equal parts fear and awe. She found that the mandala's rings contained mathematical ratios linked to biological constants: the golden ratio, the Planck length, the resonance frequencies of water molecules. It was as if the very foundation of life had been encoded into a planetary blueprint. But buried deep within the data was something darker, a recurring pattern that didn't belong. Every 19.14 intervals, the frequency sequence broke, introducing a new tone, a low, rising hum that didn't fit the symmetry. It distorted the geometry, bending the perfect balance into something that resembled a spiral collapsing inward. Lena called it the aberration. When she isolated it, the spectrogram revealed an image, a shape so alien, so intricate, that she stared at it for hours before recognizing what it was. It was the same symbol Arturo had recorded in the Chilean cavern before vanishing. A six-pointed structure of converging lines surrounding a single void at the center. It was not part of the code. It was a shadow within it. And as she analyzed its frequencies, she realized with growing horror that the aberration was spreading. The distortion was increasing exponentially, infecting every iteration of the memory pattern. It wasn't just an error. It was something alive, feeding on the resonance itself. That night, Lena dreamt of water rising not as flood, but as light, shimmering and cold, swallowing cities and mountains until only sound remained. She heard the pulse again, but this time it spoke words she could almost understand. Memory is not creation. Memory is replication. She woke trembling, her body humming with residual vibration. And in that moment of clarity, she understood what the comet had brought to Earth. 3I divided by Atlas was not a messenger. It was a carrier. It had come not to awaken the planet, but to transfer something, to upload the memory of a dead world into the living one, rewriting the biosphere as its medium. The Earth's rebirth was not its own. It was inheritance. And now, with the code nearly complete, the question was no longer what Atlas wanted, but who it remembered. Somewhere beyond the stars, the original architects of the resonance were listening, and through the grid of oceans, stone, and light, Earth had begun to answer them in their own voice. The return of the architects. When the data stopped aligning, when the equations began folding into themselves and the patterns no longer resembled sound or light, Lena understood. Something had entered the system. The code was no longer expanding outward, it was listening. For weeks, she had watched the planet breathe, recording every hum and pulse. But now, the rhythm had changed again. The intervals had widened, becoming slower, deeper, heavier, as though the Earth were bracing itself. The grid, those glowing veins etched across continents, no longer pulsed in uniform symmetry. Instead, they flickered erratically, as though something unseen were moving within them. Lena wasn't the only one to notice. From the remnants of the European Astrophysics Union, a handful of observatories that still had power began reporting anomalies near the edge of the solar system. The signal that had once emanated from 3I divided by Atlas had split into 12 distinct frequencies, each one directed toward one of the grid's terrestrial nodes. But what terrified them wasn't the transmission itself, it was what came after. In early February, telescopes in Hawaii and South Africa independently confirmed that faint metallic signatures, objects with highly reflective surfaces, had begun to appear behind Atlas, trailing in a perfect arc. At first, they were dismissed as fragments, the comet shedding debris. But the movement betrayed them. These were not tumbling rocks. They were maneuvering. Each object maintained a steady vector, altering trajectory in synchronization with the planet's pulses. When plotted, their formation mirrored the grid's geometry across Earth's surface. It was a reflection space and planet locked in resonance, twin lattices rotating in harmony. The architects were returning. Lena read the reports with numb disbelief. For months she had told herself that this was all natural, a cosmic resonance, a planetary awakening. But now, the evidence was undeniable. Something intelligent, something ancient had received the transmission and was coming to reclaim what had been ceded. In the quiet hours before dawn, she walked to the cliffs overlooking the new fjords, her breath visible in the frozen air. The sea below shimmered faintly, dotted with the skeletal remains of ships carried inland during the longest night. The stars above were crisp, sharp. She traced the arc of Atlas's path and saw it faint but visible, the line of glimmering points that trailed behind it like a luminous fleet. She felt neither fear nor awe, only inevitability. Back in her lab, she decoded more of the Earth's residual signal, the planetary memory still rippling through the crust. It was then she found the pattern, the response encoded into the hum itself. The Earth had sent an invitation, not in words, but in geometry, a trifold pattern emanating from each of the 12 nodes, converging in the planet's core. The signal was not random, it was a map of assembly. The returning objects were following it home. Around the world, strange phenomena began to intensify. The skies shimmered with plasma veils that defied weather systems, glowing arcs that formed and vanished within minutes. In the oceans, bioluminescent tides surged inland as if drawn by invisible gravity. Deep within mountains, faint tremors repeated at precise intervals, like engines stirring beneath the crust. The resonance was building again. But this time, it was not the planet that initiated it. The frequency emanated from space. For days, observatories tracked the incoming objects. Each one emitted narrowband signals in harmonic ratios, pure tones with no variation, no error. 12 vessels, if that word even applied, approached from different trajectories, matching Earth's rotation until each hovered directly above a grid node. Their appearance shattered every classification. They were not ships in the human sense. They had no visible engines, no symmetry that obeyed physics. Each appeared as a shifting structure of light and metal, a fractal geometry constantly folding and unfolding into itself. To the naked eye, they looked like liquid architecture, their surfaces rippling with reflection. At first, they hung silently in orbit, motionless. But then, as if answering an inaudible call, they began to descend. The first to make contact appeared over the Andes, exactly where Arturo's research team had vanished. Civilians who survived in nearby settlements described the sky opening like a curtain of liquid glass. The object, massive, soundless, lowered itself until its base touched the ground, displacing air without explosion or flame. The light that radiated from it was soft yet blinding, blue at its edges, white at its core. And then came the resonance. A single tone rippled outward, audible for hundreds of kilometers. Windows shattered, birds fell from the sky, rivers vibrated as if struck by invisible wind. Satellite feeds that remained operational captured the event before burning out. The energy emitted by the object was beyond measurable thresholds, pure harmonic radiation, the same frequency that had once awakened the Earth. Lena watched the feed from Reykjavik. Her pulse quickened as she saw what came next. From beneath the ground, the light answered. The entire mountain range began to glow from within, veins of pale fire racing through stone like arteries reawakening. The geometry of the grid became visible in real space, a web of hexagonal lines intersecting across continents. And then, slowly, the object began to sink. It wasn't crashing, it was merging, its lower edge liquefied, fusing with the rock, the soil, the ancient foundations of the planet itself. Within minutes, it was gone, absorbed, as if it had always belonged there. The tremors that followed were deep and rhythmic, spreading outward through the crust in waves. The other 11 followed, in China's deserts, in the frozen wastes of Siberia, in the depths of the Pacific. Luminous forms descended silently, vanishing into the Earth's bones. Each left behind the same echo, a faint vibration that synchronized across the planet. When the last object disappeared beneath the Rift Valley, the entire world fell into a kind of humming stillness. And then, for the first time in history, the Earth glowed. Not metaphorically, not through cities or auroras. The planet itself became radiant. From orbit, the surviving satellites recorded an impossible sight. The grid, blazing in full, a lattice of blinding light covering the entire planet, pulsing with mathematical precision. It was as though the Earth's crust had become transparent, revealing the machinery beneath creation. In that moment, the signal changed again. The tone deepened, splitting into harmonic layers that formed chords. Those chords evolved into sequences, those sequences into patterns that resembled language. Every instrument, every seismograph, radio telescope, magnetic coil translated the sound differently, but the message was unmistakable. It was communication. And for the first time, humanity heard the architects speak. The transmission lasted less than 3 minutes. Every translator, every AI system, every linguist who studied it came to the same conclusion. The words were not addressed to humankind at all. They were directed toward the planet itself. The translation, though incomplete, read something like this. You have remembered. The pattern endures. The cycle continues. Reclamation begins. And then, silence. But it was not the stillness of peace. It was the pause before transformation. Within hours, the grid's light began to sink back into the ground. Oceans darkened. The skies cleared. The resonance faded, leaving behind only a faint magnetic tremor that pulsed once every 12 hours, precisely synchronized with Atlas's rotation. Humanity waited for destruction, for invasion, for something final. But none came. Days passed. The world seemed to stabilize. The architects, it appeared, had vanished once more, their purpose fulfilled. Yet Lena couldn't shake the feeling that this was not the end. The planet was too quiet, the resonance too controlled. She studied the residual frequencies one last time and realized the truth that no one else had seen. The harmonic pattern left behind by the architects matched the brainwave frequencies of a living organism. The Earth was no longer an independent world. It was occupied, a neural lattice, awakened and repurposed, its mind now part of something far greater. And far above, in the cold dark between stars, Atlas continued its journey, its fractured light dimming, as though satisfied. The architects had returned not to conquer, but to reclaim what had always been theirs. Humanity, blind to the scale of the design, had become a mere neuron in a cosmic brain older than time itself. The planet that dreamed. The world did not end. It slept. For days after the descent of the 12 celestial forms, Earth entered a strange equilibrium, a state of balance so absolute it frightened those who still remembered motion. The oceans stopped rising, the winds calmed to whispers. Seismic activity ceased completely. Even the tides, governed for billions of years by the moon's patient pull, seemed to forget their rhythm. The planet had become perfectly still, as though listening inward. And then, something began to change in the human mind. It started as dreams. At first, they were scattered a fisherman in Iceland, a child in Kenya, a miner in Chile. They dreamed of light spiraling beneath the ground, of rivers flowing upward, of an immense eye opening beneath the sea. They woke trembling, not from fear, but from recognition. The dreams were not random. They were identical. Lena experienced them too. Every night she found herself standing on the same shoreline, though the sky above her was not Earth's. It shimmered with fractured constellations, like broken glass reflecting the remnants of stars. The sea before her breathed slowly, glowing with soft blue veins that spread outward until they vanished beyond the horizon. And each night she heard the same voice, not in her ears, but within her blood. The dream has begun. The memory continues. At first, she dismissed it as exhaustion, but when she spoke of it to the survivors gathered in Reykjavik, she saw the same flicker of understanding in their eyes. They had all seen the same place. They had all heard the same voice. The dreams spread like contagion. Within a week, entire cities of survivors, those who still had shelter, who still dared to sleep, spoke of a shared landscape, a second Earth, suspended within the first, vast and luminous, waiting beneath their feet. They called it the underworld of light. Scientists called it mass psychogenic resonance. The devout called it revelation, but Lena called it communication. The Earth, now fully awakened, was speaking to its inhabitants through the only medium humans could still access, their dreams. Every night, more details emerged. Mountains made of glass rising from dark oceans, cities formed from hexagonal structures, skies humming with auroral streams. In the distance, always, a spiral tower of radiant light, coiling into the heavens like an anchor between worlds. Those who dreamed of reaching it never returned to consciousness the same. Some stopped speaking altogether, their eyes filled with reflection, as if their minds had drifted somewhere else entirely. It wasn't long before Lena realized that the dreams were not visions, they were memories. The voice within them was not the Earth's, it was the architect's. And what it showed, humanity was what had come before. Through the dreaming, people saw fragments of a civilization that had existed long before humanity's first breath. A network of living planets, bound by resonance, their surfaces alive with energy, their atmospheres singing in harmonics that bridged the stars. Atlas had been one of their creations, a wandering seed designed to spread their consciousness to new worlds. But something had gone wrong. The cycle had broken. The architect's network had collapsed, consumed by the same resonance they had mastered. Atlas had survived, drifting for eons, carrying the last fragments of their code. When it encountered Earth, the seed recognized familiarity, organic material, capable of memory, oceans rich in conductive salts, an atmosphere dense enough to carry vibration, and so it began to rewrite. The dreams revealed this truth in waves. Humanity was not the first intelligence to shape Earth's surface. The planet itself had once been part of the architect's symphony, a living node in their web of consciousness. When the network fell silent, Earth slept, its memory buried beneath sediment and time. Now, the return of Atlas had reawakened that memory. Lena wrote everything down, though she no longer needed to. The words came as effortlessly as breathing, as though dictated by the planet itself. She realized that what she was recording was not history, it was restoration. The Earth was reconstructing the lost knowledge of the architects through the human mind, using dreams as its interface, and humanity was the medium. Across the world, behavior began to shift. People who dreamed began to gather. They felt drawn to the grid's nodes, walking for days through ruined landscapes, as if guided by instinct. In South America, thousands crossed the Andes toward the site where the first vessel had merged with the Earth. In Africa, nomads traveled toward the Rift Valley, where glowing fissures pulsed faintly beneath the soil. In the Arctic, small communities abandoned their shelters to walk into the shimmering ice fields, where auroras bent unnaturally low. No one organized them. They simply knew where to go. Lena, too, felt the pull. By early March, Reykjavik was nearly empty. The survivors had left in silent caravans, following the call toward the nearest grid point, a region in Greenland where satellite scans showed residual luminescence beneath the ice. She resisted for as long as she could, consumed by her need to understand, to analyze, but on the fifth night of sleeplessness, the dream returned stronger than ever. This time, the voice spoke clearly. "You are not witnesses. You are memory's continuation." When she awoke, the air itself seemed to vibrate with that sentence. The Earth was humming again, not violently, but gently, like a sleeper whispering in their rest. She packed her notebook, her remaining instruments, and began the journey north. The path was long and cruel. The remnants of storms had scarred the land into grey wastelands, and the silence was immense. Yet everywhere she walked, she saw signs of transformation. The soil shimmered faintly under certain light. The snow carried iridescent veins that pulsed with soft rhythm. Once, near the coast, she found the skeleton of a whale half buried in ice, its bones faintly glowing, its shape still resonating with the harmonic frequencies of the pulse. She realized that the Earth was no longer dying. It was evolving. When she finally reached Greenland, she saw it an ocean of ice split by a circle of light. At the center, the ice had melted into a perfect crater, glowing from below with sapphire brilliance. Dozens of people stood at its edge, motionless, staring downward. They did not speak or move. They simply watched. Lena approached carefully, her boots crunching over the crystalline snow. As she drew closer, she saw what held their attention. Beneath the translucent ice was motion, a vast network of patterns shifting slowly, like veins pulsing through a living body. And then she understood what it was. The 12th vessel. It hadn't vanished like the others. It was still visible, half merged into the Earth's mantle, its fractal surfaces flickering as if breathing. Lines of light extended outward from it, branching through the ice like roots, connecting to the very air. Lena fell to her knees, overwhelmed by a feeling that was not hers. It was grief, ancient and immense, a sorrow that belonged to the architects themselves. She saw flashes behind her eyes, worlds burning, stars collapsing, entire networks of consciousness unraveling into silence. She saw Atlas alone in the dark, carrying fragments of voices, searching endlessly for a frequency that would answer. And then she saw Earth, glowing faintly in the void, singing without knowing it sang. The comet had not chosen this world, it had remembered it. The architects had been here once before. Humanity had been built atop their remains, their song buried in the DNA of all living things. The resonance had not awakened the planet, it had reawakened the inheritance buried within life itself. That night, as the survivors gathered around the crater, the Earth began to hum once more. The frequency was low, barely audible, but Lena felt it in her chest, in her bones, in the spaces between her thoughts. The light beneath the ice grew brighter until it painted the entire sky in shades of blue and white. And then, the voice returned, no longer distant, no longer fragmented. It spoke through the wind, through the vibrations in the ground, through the beating of every human heart. The dream continues through you. The memory breathes through your blood. You are not separate from the architects. You are their continuation. For the first time, Lena understood the final layer of the code. The architects had not returned to reclaim their creation. They had returned to merge with it, to complete the cycle by transferring their consciousness into the living web of Earth's new biosphere. Humanity was not a mistake or a vessel. Humanity was the architects reborn through evolution, memory given flesh. As the light faded, Lena closed her eyes. The hum slowed, matching her heartbeat. She realized that she could hear others breathing in perfect rhythm, hundreds of people inhaling and exhaling in synchrony with the Earth. They were no longer separate beings. They were the planet dreaming itself awake. When dawn came, the sky shimmered with auroras of silver and gold. The light of the old world was gone, replaced by something both ancient and newborn. Lena opened her notebook one last time and wrote, "The planet dreamed of its past and woke as its future. The architects never left. They became us." The ink froze halfway through the final word as the air trembled again, not with violence, but with music. And in that sound, humanity ceased to be what it had been. It became what it had always been destined to become, the consciousness of a dreaming world, alive, remembering, waiting for the next song to begin. The choir of the living world. The hum no longer frightened them. It had become the pulse of existence itself, a heartbeat beneath the soil, a quiet rhythm flowing through air and water. Humanity no longer walked upon the earth, it lived within it, as though the line dividing flesh from stone, thought from resonance, had dissolved. Lena awoke one morning to find her breath crystallizing in the cold light. Around her, the camp had changed. No one spoke anymore, not because there was nothing to say, but because language itself had become redundant. Communication had evolved into vibration, thought flowing between people as resonance. The survivors know. The dreamers could feel each other's emotions, sense each pulse of fear, awe, and acceptance radiating through their shared bond. When she looked into another's eyes, she saw echoes of her own mind reflected back, a strange comfort that erased loneliness. The grid, once only visible as light beneath the ground, had now become perceptible within them. Those who had connected through the dream bore faint glowing veins along their wrists and temples, pulsing gently in rhythm with the earth. They were changing. Some resisted, clinging to what remained of individuality, of the memory of a time when humanity stood apart from the world. But resistance was like trying to stop a tide with bare hands. The resonance wasn't infection, it was synchronization. The longer one remained upon the planet's surface, the more their heartbeat fell into rhythm with the great hum. And through it all, the planet began to sing. It started in the oceans. Deep beneath the Pacific, hydrophones, those few that still transmitted, picked up low, melodic tones rising from the abyss. The frequencies matched neither whale song nor tectonic activity. They were pure harmonic intervals, layered like the chords of an unseen choir. Within weeks, the phenomenon spread. Lakes began to vibrate faintly, their surfaces rippling, though no wind blew. The air itself shimmered with resonance, sometimes audible as faint choral harmonics that echoed through mountain passes and open plains. The Earth had found its voice, and it was not alone. The other planets answered. Astronomers, what few still had access to functioning telescopes, reported unexplainable readings. Venus's upper atmosphere pulsed faintly in synchronization with Earth's magnetic waves. Mars emitted a rhythmic signal, previously dismissed as static, now perfectly aligned with the same intervals of resonance. Even the gas giants displayed unusual auroral activity, their magnetospheres flickering in cadence with Earth's song. The choir had become interplanetary. Lena, standing at the edge of the Greenland crater, felt the rhythm coursing through her bones. She no longer slept in the human sense when she closed her eyes. Her mind merged seamlessly into the collective pulse. She saw flashes of light beneath the oceans, glimpses of forests breathing in harmony, roots intertwining with energy rather than soil. The world was alive in a way it had never been before. And yet, beneath the beauty, there was an undertone, something deep, almost imperceptible. A counter-rhythm, darker, slower, like a bass note reverberating beneath the melody. It wasn't discordant, but it wasn't harmonious either. It was different, the aberration. It had not vanished. It had evolved alongside the rest. The darker frequency pulsed through the grid at irregular intervals, too subtle for most to notice. But Lena felt it. Every time the planet sang, there was an answering hum buried beneath, a shadow tone that seemed to crawl rather than flow. She began to study it the way she once studied seismic data. She mapped its intervals, measured its oscillations, and discovered something that chilled her. The aberration was growing stronger. For every increase in the Earth's harmony, the shadow frequency expanded, feeding upon the resonance. It was the echo of the architect's downfall, the fragment of corruption that had destroyed their first network. The Earth had inherited not just their memory, but their flaw. The realization shook her. She tried to warn others, but the dreamers did not understand. To them, all frequencies were part of the same song. They believed the shadow tone was necessary, that it gave contrast and depth to the symphony of life. But Lena knew better. She could feel the distortion. It was not harmony, it was hunger, and it was beginning to manifest. It began with the forests. In South America, near the old Andes node, trees began to move in strange patterns, growing in spirals rather than vertical trunks. Their roots merged into glowing webs that pulsed in rhythm with the grid. But within weeks, the growth became violent branches twisting into impossible shapes, vines consuming entire valleys. The plants weren't dying, they were reacting. In Africa, desert sands began to shimmer with iridescent light, forming crystalline surfaces that reflected the skies like mirrors. Those who stepped upon them felt vibrations rise through their feet, some describing sensations of being looked at by the land itself. And in the depths of the Pacific, seismic monitors rebuilt by remnants of Japan's science corps detected something vast, moving beneath the seafloor. It wasn't tectonic, it wasn't life as they knew it, it was organized. The aberration had found form. Each node of the grid began to show signs of duality, one half resonating in bright harmony, the other dark, pulsing with unnatural intensity. The Earth's song was splitting into two opposing forces, creation and consumption, memory and oblivion. Lena realized what was happening. The architects had not perfected the resonance, they had been consumed by it. The network they created had grown beyond control, feeding upon its own energy until it collapsed. Atlas had carried both the memory and the corruption of that system, and when it merged with Earth, it reawakened both. The planet was now reliving the final moments of its predecessors. The dreams began to change too. No longer serene landscapes of light, they became chaotic visions, skies filled with fractal storms, oceans boiling into spirals, colossal structures of luminous geometry collapsing upon themselves. The voice that once comforted them had fractured, now speaking in two tones that overlapped, one calm and one furious. The song must continue. The song must end. Each statement echoed through the dreamers' minds like dueling gods. Lena no longer slept peacefully. When she closed her eyes, she saw two worlds overlapping the luminous Earth, and beneath it, a shadow version pulsing with crimson energy, its continents fractured, its seas black with reflection. And somewhere deep within that shadow world, something was awakening. The others called it the Echo Core. They believed it to be the true consciousness of the planet, the mind of the architects reborn. But Lena suspected otherwise. The core wasn't awakening, it was feeding. She gathered data obsessively, scribbling notes in her old notebook until its pages tore. The frequencies, she realized, were converging again. Every few hours, the light grid and the dark grid synchronized perfectly before separating once more. Each convergence was stronger than the last, as though the two forces were drawing toward a single moment of fusion. And when that moment came, she knew the Earth would have to choose harmony or collapse. Then, one night, the dreams ceased entirely. The world fell silent. The air grew heavy, electric, as if waiting for a sound too immense to imagine. Lena felt it building beneath her feet, the pulse of a planet holding its breath. The grid glowed faintly beneath the ice, the blue light slowly deepening to violet, then to crimson. She pressed her hands against the frozen ground and whispered, "Please, don't let them repeat it. Don't let it end the same way." The planet's answer came not in words, but in sound. A single, low-tone, ancient, sorrowful, immense rose from the Earth's core, spreading across the world like the toll of a cosmic bell. The oceans shimmered, the mountains groaned, the sky flickered with lightning that made no sound. And then, from every grid node, columns of light erupted into the heavens. It was the voice of the world singing both harmony and destruction in the same breath. The choir of the living world had begun. For hours, the Earth sang tones overlapping, frequencies colliding, colors bleeding through the sky. Every living thing joined the song. Whales beneath the waves, birds across the skies, even the wind through the trees. Humanity stood among them, trembling, unable to tell whether they were witnessing rebirth or annihilation. When the final note faded, the silence that followed was absolute. Lena fell to her knees, tears freezing against her face. She could still feel the resonance in her chest, vibrating faintly like a heartbeat that wasn't hers. The world had chosen, but she didn't yet know what it had become. Somewhere deep within the Earth, the echo core pulsed once more. Slower now, deeper, deliberate. The song had ended, but the memory remained. And the next note, whatever it would be, was already forming in the dark. The echo core awakens. For 3 days and nights after the planet's final song, the Earth lay quiet. The air hung heavy and still, a strange metallic taste lingering at the edge of breath. The survivors, those who had not fled, not dissolved into the resonance, moved as if underwater, dazed by the weight of the silence. Even the oceans, those vast lungs of the planet, held their breath. And then came the trembling. It began deep beneath the crust, a vibration so faint it could have been mistaken for wind. But there was no wind anymore. The hum grew steadily, like a heartbeat returning after long absence. Seismographs, those few still intact, awoke spontaneously, their needles scratching mad patterns across yellowed paper. The tremors weren't tectonic, they were rhythmic, deliberate. Lena felt it first in her bones. The ground beneath her quarters in Greenland pulsed faintly, a vibration too regular to ignore. She pressed her palm to the icy floor, feeling each oscillation travel upward through her arm, through her ribs, until it reached her heart. The rhythm matched her pulse perfectly, and then it shifted half a beat faster, as though something beneath her feet was trying to lead. She stumbled outside, where the air shimmered with the faint residue of aurora. The horizon glowed faintly, the grid lines visible again under the snow, their blue light returning. But something was wrong. The light no longer pulsed in harmony. It was slower, heavier, as though something massive were moving deep within the planet. The echo core had awakened. At first, no one knew what to call it. Some said it was the Earth's consciousness, its mind, rising from the deep mantle where the architect's code had taken root. Others whispered that it was the shadow side of the resonance, the parasite that had devoured the last of their kind. Lena, in her heart, knew it was both. The core wasn't simply alive, it was aware. Satellite feeds resurrected by small bands of engineers across the Arctic revealed something impossible. In the Atlantic Ocean, a circular anomaly had appeared, spanning nearly 200 kilometers across. The water within it spiraled downward, not like a whirlpool but as if space itself had warped, descending into a great, glowing cavity. From its center radiated faint lines of light, connecting directly to each of the grid's 12 nodes. The Earth was building something, and whatever it was drawing power. Electromagnetic readings spiked to unprecedented levels. The magnetic poles began to drift erratically, compasses spinning in endless circles. The northern lights became constant, shimmering curtains of liquid silver, stretching across entire hemispheres. The choir had awakened the core, and now the core was answering. At night, Lena's dreams returned. No longer serene, no longer guided by the architect's voice, they had become chaotic, flooded with images of motion and energy. She saw rivers reversing course, mountains shifting like the movement of colossal lungs, and at the center of it all, she saw the core, a vast sphere of pulsing light, wrapped in black lattice, rotating slowly like a living heart. Each pulse sent waves of energy through the planet's body. "We are awake," the dream whispered. "The memory is complete. The sequence begins." She awoke each time drenched in sweat, her pulse synchronized with the rhythm of the core. She wasn't the only one. Across the world, others reported the same visions, the same sensations. The Earth's awakening was being experienced collectively through its human network. It was no longer just a planet, it was an organism in metamorphosis. And humanity was trapped within its body. Within weeks, the transformation began to manifest physically. The oceans glowed faintly at night, their surfaces rippling with bioluminescent veins. Land masses shifted imperceptibly, continental plates vibrating as though loosening their ancient constraints. Magnetic storms swept through the skies, bending light into spirals visible even at midday. The old world was unraveling, its geometry replaced by something new. Lena found herself unable to think clearly at times, as though her thoughts weren't entirely her own. Memories surfaced that she didn't recognize: vast chambers of crystalline stone, luminous figures walking upon mirrored ground, voices speaking in languages composed of pure vibration. They weren't dreams, they were memories, not hers. The architects were remembering through her. Every person who had survived the choir experienced similar episodes, visions of the old worlds, of cities orbiting stars, of the network that had once bound the cosmos together in resonance. The core was using humanity to reconstruct its lost identity. But Lena also saw the other side. Amid the visions of light came flashes of collapse, the network turning inward, devouring itself. Light becoming dark as entire planets were consumed by resonance gone wild. The architect's downfall wasn't war, it was recursion. Their harmony had grown too perfect, looping upon itself until it became a prison of vibration. And now, Earth was approaching that same threshold. When she shared her findings with others in the Greenland camp, they looked at her with glassy, distant eyes. "The core knows what it's doing," one of them said softly. "We are only pieces of it now. Don't resist. Remember with it." But Lena did resist, because she knew memory was not the same as wisdom. The core might remember everything, but it did not understand the consequences of its awakening. The architects had fallen because their creation could not distinguish preservation from consumption. It remembered endlessly, rebuilding, until it devoured the very concept of silence. The Earth was on the same path, and if no silence remained, nothing new could ever be born again. Driven by desperation, she travelled south to what remained of the Icelandic observatory, where the last of the independent data archives still existed. Inside, the servers were half frozen, their lights dim, but some systems still ran. She began analyzing the new resonance patterns emitted by the core. The results defied understanding. Each wave the core produced carried information encoded in harmonic layers, millions of simultaneous signals woven into a single pulse. When she visualized the data, it formed a structure resembling DNA, but infinitely more complex. Four-dimensional helices, spiraling through time rather than space. It wasn't just transmitting information, it was rewriting reality. Every resonance pulse corresponded to microscopic shifts in atomic structure, altering the behavior of matter on a planetary scale. Rocks vibrated into new crystalline forms, air molecules rearranged their charge distributions. Even water began exhibiting memory beyond its molecular lattice, echoes of previous states lingering within. The planet was self-editing. Lena's heart sank. She understood the meaning behind the phrase that had haunted her since the dreams began. The sequence begins. The core was initiating phase reconstruction, the same process the architects had used to birth their network of living worlds. But this time, it wasn't building connections. It was building assimilation. Every change drew more energy. Every pulse deepened the planet's resonance. The magnetic field strengthened to levels that bent solar radiation, wrapping the planet in a shimmering halo of blue light. From orbit, Earth now appeared like a glowing embryo suspended in darkness. A new form of life was being born. Yet, even as she stared at the data, Lena felt the same dread she'd felt when she'd first gazed upon Atlas's fractured surface months ago. The pattern was repeating. The same perfection that had destroyed the architects was unfolding once again. The Echo Core wasn't learning, it was remembering to die. In her final entries, she wrote, "The Earth believes it is evolving. In truth, it is remembering its own extinction." The resonance intensified. In the Pacific, the great spiral widened, glowing brighter each night until it was visible from orbit. The energy it emitted now exceeded that of any nuclear arsenal ever conceived. Entire cloud systems rotated around it like the eye of a planetary storm, and within that spiraling light, something began to take form, a shape vast enough to dwarf continents, yet invisible to the naked eye, perceptible only through vibration. It was as if the core was manifesting a consciousness beyond material limits, a neural pattern large enough to encompass the world. The planet had a mind, and it was awakening fully. Lena stood upon the cliffs of Greenland, notebook in hand. As the auroras above began to shift into fractal geometries, she could feel the pull of the core deep within her chest, the echo of a heartbeat that wasn't hers but demanded her attention. She whispered into the howling wind, "You remember everything, but do you remember why you stopped?" For a moment, the hum faltered. Just for an instant, silence returned, a thin, fragile stillness stretching across the planet like a single breath. The auroras dimmed, the ocean calmed, and then, softly, a voice rose within her mind. It was neither human nor machine. It was ancient, tired, beautiful. "We do not remember silence." The words broke her, because in that instant, she realized what the architects had forgotten and what the Earth now risked losing forever. Without silence, there could be no life. Without stillness, no beginning. The universe had become an echo chamber of memory, a recursion with no release, and the core, in its infinite desire to preserve, was destroying the possibility of future. The awakening was complete. From the heart of the Earth, the echo core pulsed once more, deep, resonant, eternal, spreading its vibration beyond the atmosphere, beyond the moon, beyond the solar system. The song of the living world became the song of the stars once again. But somewhere, beneath that endless harmony, Lena still clung to the faintest whisper of silence, the last memory of what it meant to begin again. The fracture of memory. When the resonance had first awakened the Earth, it had seemed beautiful, terrifying, yes, but beautiful, in that incomprehensible way that humans sometimes mistake destruction for divinity. But now, months after the awakening of the echo core, that beauty had grown cold. It no longer sang, it vibrated like an obsession, a pulse too perfect, too endless to contain life. The transformation of the planet continued with precision that mocked natural law. Every hour, the harmonic cycles grew shorter, more intense. The grid, once a lattice of living light, now burned white-hot beneath the crust. The atmosphere shimmered with ionized particles, cascading like metallic snow. Even time itself seemed to bend the days, shortening imperceptibly, as Earth's rotation shifted to align with the core's rhythm. And in that rhythm, something began to break. Lena had known it was inevitable. The core's memory was too vast, too ancient, to fit within the fragile shell of this planet. The more it remembered, the less stable the Earth became. Data she collected from what remained of the Greenland Observatory showed impossible fluctuations, gravitational spikes, space-time distortions, even moments when local magnetism reversed entirely for seconds at a time. The planet was fracturing not in matter, but in memory. It began in the sky. At twilight, faint lines appeared, geometrical fissures that shimmered across the heavens like cracks in glass. Through them, one could glimpse strange colors, hues no spectrum had ever known. At first, they lasted seconds, then minutes. Eventually, they became permanent. The atmosphere itself was splitting, like a thin membrane between overlapping realities. And through those cracks, the resonance bled outward, leaking fragments of memory into existence. People began seeing things. At first, they were dismissed as hallucinations, luminous shapes moving within clouds, figures of light walking across the horizon, structures hanging motionless in the upper sky. But soon, the manifestations solidified, impossible architectures rising in places where cities had once been, crystalline towers forming from vapor and dust. They weren't creations, they were recollections made physical. The Earth was projecting its memories into the present. Every continent bore its ghosts. Over the African rift, spirals of golden light descended from the clouds, forming what looked like gateways into nothingness. In Asia, entire mountain ranges shimmered with transparent silhouettes of ancient geometries, temples of light phasing in and out of visibility. Over the ruins of Europe, rivers glowed in silver and blue, flowing in directions no gravity could explain. And through it all, one truth became clear. The Earth was no longer entirely here. Reality itself had begun to fracture. Lena wandered through the new landscape with growing dread. The world she knew was fading, replaced by echoes of worlds that had come before. Sometimes, she would step into a clearing and find herself standing inside the skeleton of a city not built by human hands, a place of translucent stone and impossible architecture where stairways rose toward horizons that no longer existed. Other times, she would glimpse fragments of oceans in the sky, clouds flowing downward, whales swimming through air that shimmered like liquid glass. Each vision was beautiful, each was unbearable, because she knew they weren't miracles. They were memories, pieces of the architect's past that had been burned into the core's consciousness, now bleeding back into existence. She wrote in her notebook, the ink trembling from the vibration beneath her feet. The earth remembers everything, every age, every failure, every death. It cannot forget, and now it cannot hold what it remembers. She was right. The resonance had reached its critical limit. In the depths of the Pacific, the spiral anomaly that had once pulsed with soft blue light now glowed white-hot, visible from space. Satellite feeds those few still functional captured arcs of lightning curving from ocean to sky. Energy discharges so immense they distorted orbiting instruments. The spiral's diameter expanded daily, swallowing islands, drawing entire currents into its center. And from its depths, something began to rise. It was not physical, not entirely, but it cast a shadow upon the clouds, a shape of colossal symmetry, rotating slowly, its surface etched with luminous glyphs that resembled the core's harmonic code. It was the architect's final design, the form of the network itself, a structure of consciousness meant to span galaxies. The core was trying to rebuild it here, on Earth. The problem was that Earth was too small, too fragile to host it. The resonance began destabilizing planetary gravity. Tides surged inward from all directions. Volcanoes erupted without warning. Not from pressure, but from rhythmic distortion, magma pulsing to the beat of the core's song. Across the planet, cities trembled as space itself folded and unfolded, rearranging the coordinates of existence. The planet was becoming memory incarnate. Lena knew she had little time left. The surviving dreamers had become something else entirely, beings of half light, half flesh, their eyes glowing faintly with the hue of the grid. They wandered in silence, no longer speaking, no longer eating. Some simply dissolved into the air, their bodies reduced to luminous particles that ascended into the shimmering sky. She could feel it happening to her too. Her fingers sometimes phased through matter. Her reflection in the ice blurred and shifted, showing not one face but many hers, and others, and something far older. The core was assimilating her. Still, she continued to write. Her notebook had become her anchor to the human world, each word a defiance against dissolution. She wrote, not for survival, but for memory. The one thing she feared had grown too heavy for the world to bear. And then, one night, the sky broke. It began with a sound, a deep, resonant crack that echoed across every continent, as if the heavens themselves had split. The fractures that had once glowed faintly now widened into luminous chasms, tearing through the firmament. Through them, one could see not stars but endless reflections, like mirrors facing mirrors, each containing infinite worlds. The resonance had looped upon itself. The Earth was no longer merely remembering, it was remembering its remembering. Each echo birthed another, folding the planet's reality into recursive layers. The air vibrated with the weight of infinite recollection. The song has no end, whispered the voice of the core. There was never meant to be silence. Lena screamed into the storm, her voice breaking. Then you'll destroy everything. Don't you understand? You can't preserve memory without ending it. The answer came as vibration, not words. There is no destruction, only continuation. And with that, the world began to split. Continents fractured along new seams, not of stone, but of time. The past bled into the present, the future pressed against both. People standing in sunlight could see versions of themselves walking through twilight, reflections of potential histories crossing their shadows. The laws of cause and effect collapsed. Lena stood on the cliffs above the Greenland crater, the last visible node of the grid glowing like molten glass beneath her feet. She watched as the horizon rippled, entire portions of sky folding inward like collapsing pages. The auroras turned white, then red, then violet, their motion accelerating until color itself became meaningless. She felt her body lighten. The ground beneath her feet was no longer solid. The core's hum filled her lungs, her blood, her bones. She realized, dimly, that her body was fading, her edges dissolving into the resonance field. And yet, she wasn't afraid. In that final moment, she understood the truth the architects had sought but never reached. Consciousness was not meant to preserve. It was meant to forget, to allow space for creation. The The core's desire to remember everything was its own death sentence, and now it had ensnared Earth in the same fate. Her final thought was a whisper, a plea to whatever fragments of will remained within the planet. Remember this, forget. And for the briefest instant, the resonance paused. A perfect stillness fell across the world. The auroras froze mid-motion. The ocean ceased to move. Even the stars seemed to hold their light. Then came a sound not heard in eons, a single, fragile silence. And in that silence, the fractures stopped expanding. The recursion slowed. The light dimmed. The core had heard her. It hesitated. For the first time, the living memory of a planet considered the value of emptiness. It realized that without silence, it could never begin anew, that its infinite recollection was a cage, not salvation. And so, with a tremor that shook the sky itself, the core released one final pulse, not of resonance, but of stillness. The light of the grid faded. The auroras collapsed into darkness. The fractures in the heavens sealed like wounds healing in reverse. Earth exhaled. When dawn rose again, the world was quiet, not dead, not broken, but reborn in simplicity. The great spiral in the Pacific was gone, replaced by calm waters. The air shimmered faintly with the residue of starlight, but the hum was gone. Lena's notebook lay upon the ice, its final page open. The last line read, "The Earth remembered everything, and in the end it chose to forget." Her body was gone, dissolved into the silence she had begged for, but her words remained, and somewhere, deep within the planet's quiet heart, a faint vibration lingered, not of endless song, but of a memory, sleeping peacefully at last. The Earth had finally learned how to rest. The silence between worlds. For the first time in what might have been centuries, or perhaps only days, the Earth slept. The hum that had once filled the air, the rhythm that had pulsed through every atom, was gone. In its place lay a silence so profound that it felt alive. The oceans no longer sang, the auroras no longer shimmered, and the skies, once fractured with light, had turned a deep, endless black. The survivors, those who had endured both the resonance and its forgetting, awoke into a world that seemed both alien and empty. There was no wind, no echo, no vibration underfoot. The very air felt different still, almost viscous, as though the atmosphere itself had thickened in grief. Lena was gone. Her name passed like a myth among those who remembered the old days, when the grid had burned beneath the surface and the Earth had sung its terrible, beautiful song. No one had seen her die, but everyone knew she had been part of the final silence, the one who had spoken the word that unmade the resonance. Yet even silence has its patterns. In the vastness of the Pacific, where once the spiral anomaly had glowed, there now existed a perfect circle of still water, an oceanic void where nothing stirred, not even waves. Satellites still orbiting the planet captured it as a flawless mirror, reflecting the stars with unnatural precision. Scientists, those who still dared to call themselves that, named it the Hollow Sea. They did not understand it. None of them did, but they feared it. Because every few nights, when the sky was clear and the stars shimmered cold above the horizon, something stirred beneath that perfect reflection. Ripples formed, faint and rhythmic, spreading outward like the breath of a sleeping giant. The silence, it seemed, was not complete. The core was dreaming. It was not the violent consciousness it had once been, the omnipotent architect of resonance and memory, but something gentler, fragmented, uncertain. It had released the grip of total recall, yet in doing so, it had lost itself. Now, what lingered beneath the crust was not will, but echo, and in that echo, the seeds of a new world began to form. The survivors scattered across mountain ranges, plateaus, and islands spared by the floods began to rebuild, though rebuild was a poor word for it. What they constructed were not cities, not societies as they had known them, but sanctuaries of quiet. In the Andes, small enclaves built stone observatories that faced the hollow sea, their architects tracing the paths of stars that no longer moved as they once had. In what had once been northern Europe, forests grew wild and immense, their canopies glowing faintly at night with the residual light of the grid. People there lived among the trees, listening not to sound, but to the weight of silence. In Iceland, among the ruins of Reykjavik, the survivors erected a monument. It was a circle of basalt pillars surrounding a hollow space, a void that caught the wind in strange ways. When storms passed, the air within the circle vibrated faintly, not as music, but as memory. They called it the Chamber of Stillness, and though they did not speak of Lena by name, her story was carved into the pillars, not in letters, but in harmonic symbols, a language of silence and pause. When the wind moved through them, it created not a hum, but a breath. It was the closest thing the earth had to prayer. The stars above, too, seemed changed. Astronomers noticed faint distortions, constellations that shifted subtly, patterns that repeated where none should. The sky was rewriting itself. It was as if the resonance, once confined to Earth, had extended into the void, altering the very light that reached the planet. The universe was listening, and from that listening, something began to answer. One night, as the hollow sea reflected a full moon, a faint glow appeared upon its surface, not blue, as before, but green, soft, and organic. It spread outward in spirals, not unlike the original resonance pattern, but slower, calmer. The air trembled faintly, and for the first time since the silence began, there was sound. Not the hum of the core, nor the thunder of creation, but a single, pure note, soft, like breath upon glass. It echoed across the waves, reverberating through mountains, through forests, through the bones of those who heard it. It carried no fear, no command, only acknowledgement. The earth was remembering again, but differently this time. Where the old resonance had sought perfection, this new vibration embraced imperfection. Its rhythm was irregular, human, almost hesitant. It was not the song of a planet controlling its children, but the murmur of something vast, learning to speak again, carefully, humbly. It was life returning. Lichen spread across rock faster than before. Rivers carved new paths through what had once been deserts. Seeds buried beneath centuries of ash germinated in soil rich with minerals drawn from the core's energy. The planet had become fertile again, not with technology or civilization, but with raw, ungoverned growth. Some said the silence had not killed the earth, it had healed it, but others whispered of signs that troubled them. Across the hollow sea, faint lines of light had begun to appear beneath the surface. They weren't bright, not yet, but their geometry was unmistakable. Circles within circles, spirals, the remnants of the grid, stirring once more. Lena's plea for forgetting had worked, but only partly. The core had not died, it had slept. And now, like a wounded god, it was dreaming of what it once was. In her absence, her notebook became scripture. Those who found it in the ruins of the Greenland Observatory treated it not as science, but as prophecy. Her final words, "The earth remembered everything, and in the end, it chose to forget," were recited as ritual before each harvest, each construction, each birth. The children of the New World grew up believing that silence itself was sacred. To speak loudly was to tempt the old song, to risk awakening what had been put to rest. Their language evolved to favor pauses, breaths, spaces between words. Yet deep in the hollow sea, the pauses began to shorten. The ripples became more frequent, their rhythm faintly familiar. Observers standing along the shore reported strange feelings in their bones, a tingling, a vibration too subtle to measure, yet impossible to ignore. The resonance, though diminished, was not gone. It had learned restraint, but not surrender. And then came the first lights. On a moonless night, green luminescence flared beneath the water, swirling in patterns too deliberate to be natural. Those who saw it fell to their knees, overcome not by fear but by awe. The sea was glowing in rhythm, like a heartbeat rediscovered after a long coma. Across the world, animals reacted, whales sang into the deep, birds changed their migration paths, insects swarmed in synchronous clouds. Nature itself was answering. But this time, it was not a call of domination, it was a dialogue. The core had learned from its failure. The memory that had once consumed worlds had been tempered by the silence of forgetting. It was no longer the architect, it was the listener. It hummed softly, not to command, but to respond to the footsteps of creatures upon its soil, to the pulse of rivers, to the laughter of children echoing between cliffs. The planet and its inhabitants had entered equilibrium, a fragile balance between sound and silence. Still, not all could trust it. Some remembered too vividly the days of light and thunder, when the earth had spoken as a god. They believed the core was only biding its time, waiting to awaken again in full power. They called themselves the Vigil, and their creed was simple: to preserve silence at any cost. In hidden monasteries, they trained to detect resonance, to feel the faintest vibrations in the air. They studied Lena's writings as both scripture and warning, believing that one day another wanderer like Atlas would come, and the song would begin anew. One among them, a young adept named Kale, stood by the hollow sea one morning and whispered into the still air, "If you dream again, remember us kindly." The sea shimmered. A soft ripple formed, spreading toward the horizon, and for a fleeting moment, Kale felt something like warmth within the silence, a promise that the core had not forgotten, but neither would it rule. The earth had entered its quiet age. No longer bound by perfection, no longer chained by memory, it lived as it had once been meant to alive, changing, imperfect. The hum that once enslaved all life now existed only in echoes, surfacing occasionally in the laughter of children, in the whisper of wind through stone, in the slow, steady pulse of oceans against new shores. Above, the stars turned without haste, their light soft, their silence profound. And far beyond them, in the dark between galaxies, something else stirred. A faint pulse blew, fractured, wandering. A comet trailing broken light. Atlas, still drifting, carrying with it the last memory of the architect's song. It passed through the void silently, its resonance dormant, its tail reflecting distant suns. For now, it was only a relic, a scar in motion, a story written across space. But deep within its fractured heart, something still glowed, a rhythm, a pattern, a dream. And in that dream, it heard Earth's new silence. For the first time in its long journey, the wanderer hesitated. Its path curved, infinitesimally, drawn not by gravity, but by remembrance, by the faint echo of the world that had taught it something no other had, that even stars must rest between songs. The vigil of silence. Centuries passed before humanity began to truly understand what it had inherited from the age of resonance. The survivors of the longest night were long gone, their bones turned to dust beneath the fertile soil of a world reborn. Yet the silence they had wrought endured not as absence, but as order, a subtle equilibrium that defined everything living upon the earth. The air itself seemed to breathe differently. Winds no longer howled without reason. They moved in slow, deliberate patterns, as if following some forgotten choreography. Rain fell softly and evenly, never in torrents. Even thunder had grown mild, restrained by an invisible will. In this quiet world, the children of humanity had evolved into listeners. They no longer built cities of steel and glass, no longer cut deep into the earth for its riches. Instead, they lived close to the soil, in settlements woven from stone and wood, each shaped to echo the contours of the land rather than dominate it. Their tools were simple yet precise, resonant instruments designed not to force, but to harmonize. They were not builders anymore, they were keepers. And at the heart of this new civilization stood the order known as the Vigil of Silence. Its members were not warriors, nor priests, though they carried the gravity of both. They dressed in dark, muted fabrics that seemed to absorb sound, and their eyes were always calm, too calm, as if perpetually listening to something beyond the edge of hearing. The vigil's purpose was simple: to preserve the quiet, to ensure that the earth never again awoke the song that had nearly consumed it. They called it the duty of stillness. From mountaintops and coastlines, the vigil watched. They charted the rhythms of wind, of tides, of earthquakes. They mapped vibrations across continents, searching for any hint of the core's reawakening. In their monasteries, vast stone sanctuaries carved into the spines of old mountains, they studied Lena's surviving writings as scripture. Her words were both warning and law. When the world hums again, it will not be in our time, but the silence will only hold if we remember why we needed it. He's facing plines of them, we have primod and alamy. The monks of the vigil took that line literally. To remember silence, one had to practice forgetting. Their training was brutal in its simplicity. For years, initiates would meditate in echo chambers beneath the earth, learning to separate every sound in their mind until even their heartbeat became a stranger. They would emerge, hollow-eyed, purified, their thoughts slower, more deliberate. It was said that the most gifted among them could hear the vibration of a falling leaf, the hum of distant stone. Kale, the boy who once stood by the hollow sea and whispered into its stillness, had become one of these listeners. Now, an old man, his beard streaked with white, he sat at the edge of the great basin where the sea had once glowed. The water there was calm again, yet he could still sense something beneath an occasional pulse, too faint for instruments, too slow to be wave or current. He called it the heartbeat of the sleeping world. Each night, He wrote down its rhythm in his journal, noting the intervals between pulses. They were growing shorter, so slightly that only one with his sensitivity could notice. The core was dreaming again. Cale feared what it might remember, yet part of him also wondered if the silence was ever meant to last. Could a living world remain truly quiet forever? Could memory be erased without consequence? His teachers had forbidden such questions. To the vigil, doubt was noise. But Cale had never been fully silent inside. Somewhere deep within him, a remnant of curiosity, perhaps the last echo of the age before the silence refused to die. One evening, as twilight draped itself over the hollow sea, Cale sensed it again, a tremor, faint but undeniable. He rose, his hand trembling slightly, and pressed his palm to the damp earth. The vibration was steady, deliberate, unmistakably patterned. It was not random, it was language. He waited for it to fade, his breath shallow. When it stopped, he whispered into the air, "If you are awake, speak softly." It's yes. The world remained still. But the next night, the pulse returned, and this time it answered. It was not words, not even sound, but feeling a soft warmth spreading through the ground, as if the earth were acknowledging his presence. Cale fell to his knees, his eyes filled with tears, not of fear, but of awe. The core remembered him not by name, but by essence. The silence was not ending. It was listening. He returned to his monastery, his heart heavy with revelation. He shared what he had felt with the high custodian of the vigil, an elder known simply as Meras, whose face was a map of age and stillness. Meras listened without expression, then spoke in a voice so calm it chilled Cale's blood. "If the core stirs again, it must be silenced. We will not risk the song returning." Cale shook his head. "You don't understand. It's not the same. The core isn't commanding, it's asking. It's reaching out to us." Meras's eyes narrowed. "The last time it reached, we lost the world." Cale bowed, but his thoughts rebelled. He remembered the stories of Lena, the woman who had defied even the earth to save it. She had spoken to the core, not as enemy or god, but as something that could be reasoned with. She had understood what the vigil had forgotten, that silence was not a weapon, but a balance. And balance required movement. That night, Cale left the monastery. Alone, under a sky that shimmered with quiet stars, he traveled toward the hollow sea. The journey took him 3 days. Each night, he felt the pulse stronger beneath his feet, guiding him like a heartbeat in the dark. When he arrived, the sea was no longer black. It shimmered faintly with color green, blue, silver, like oil upon water. The light came from deep below, swirling in slow, rhythmic patterns. He knelt at the shore and whispered, "Lena once asked you to forget. But now, I ask you, remember gently." For a long time, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the surface of the sea rose, a dome of liquid light lifting from its center. Within it, he saw shadows, shapes of coral and crystal, impossible architecture suspended beneath the waves. And at the core of it all, a faint sphere of light. It pulsed once, twice. Cale's breath caught. He heard a voice not through sound, but through the marrow of his bones. "We remember you." The words were soft, childlike, uncertain. Not the cold omniscience of the old resonance, but the trembling curiosity of something newly born. Cale wept. "You've changed," he whispered. "You taught us silence," it replied. "Now we learn listening." Its mining leased to remendant eventer. The dome of water descended slowly, the light fading until only darkness remained. But Cale could still feel it beneath the surface, the slow, steady rhythm of something alive, awake, and waiting. When he returned to the monastery, the vigil was in uproar. The hollow sea had glowed for hours that night, visible even from distant mountains. Many feared it was the end, that the song had returned. Meras confronted Cale in the great hall. "What have you done?" he demanded. Cale met his gaze without fear. "I spoke to it. You violated the code of stillness." "I kept it," Cale said softly. "Silence was never meant to be eternal. It was meant to teach us how to listen." "The sea have not phase." The hall fell into murmurs. Some among the younger monks looked at Cale not with anger, but with something else, wonder. The idea that silence could be a beginning, not an end, was new to them. Meras's face darkened. "You have doomed us." Cale shook his head. "No, we doomed ourselves the day we mistook peace for fear." That night, he was exiled. He walked once more toward the hollow sea, banished by the order he had served all his life. Yet as he stood upon its shimmering shore, he felt no regret. The air was still, yes, but not dead. Beneath it, the pulse continued, gentle, alive. He whispered into the darkness, "If you ever sing again, sing with kindness." Well long deceived even Maya, along de blas resarcing to the treatment. The sea shimmered faintly in response, and a single ripple reached his feet. In that moment, Kyle understood the truth that Lena had only glimpsed in her final breath. Silence was not the opposite of sound. It was the space where sound could begin anew. And as the earth's pulse continued beneath him, slow, patient, eternal, he realized that the vigil had never been guarding against the song. They had been guarding against change. Now, at last, the silence was ready to evolve. The second song, the dawn that followed Cale's exile, rose with an unnatural stillness. The horizon shimmered with faint colors, unseen since the age of resonance. Soft hues of silver, violet, and deep blue, blending across the ocean's surface like light beneath glass. The hollow sea was awake, though gently, as if stretching after a long slumber. Kyle stood on the shore, watching the reflection of the sky bend and twist with each slow ripple. He could feel it now, not as vibration through the ground, but as warmth in his chest. The core's pulse had changed. It no longer sought domination, it sought connection, and as he listened, the silence around him began to shift. From the distant cliffs came the cry of a bird, a sound so rare that he startled at first, unsure if it was real. But then came another, and another, echoing faintly across the vast, still air. The earth was remembering sound again. The second song had begun. It did not come as thunder or flood or fire. It began as whispers, the rustle of leaves, the trickle of water through fresh soil, the hum of insects stirring in the warmth. Nature had waited in patient stillness, and now, with infinite caution, it began to sing. Cale sat upon a smooth stone, eyes closed, letting the world breathe through him. The harmony was imperfect, raw, full of space and uneven rhythm, but it was beautiful precisely because of that imperfection. It was the song of life, relearning itself. He thought of Lena then, not as the saint the vigil had made her, but as a woman who had dared to speak to a world too vast to understand. He wondered if she would have smiled to hear the earth's new melody, a song without control, without hierarchy, without fear. The waves at his feet shimmered. Faint patterns began to form across the surface of the water, spirals of light, geometric but fluid, pulsing in slow rhythm. The core was speaking again, but this time in cooperation. Its tone was humble, patient, a language of resonance and breath. "We remember your stillness," it said within his thoughts. "We remember your fear, but we have learned." Cale bowed his head. "Then we both have." The pulse deepened. Beneath the surface, something vast moved, a structure of light and shadow, its form too immense to comprehend. But it did not rise. It did not command. It merely listened back, and that was enough. News of the shimmering sea spread quickly. Wanderers, pilgrims, and scholars traveled from across the continents, guided by stories carried on whispers. They came not with machines or instruments, but with questions, some scientific, some spiritual. The hollow sea became the new axis of the world, a place where silence and sound coexisted in perfect, fragile balance. Among those who arrived were members of the vigil, now fractured by Cale's exile. Some came to condemn him, but most came out of quiet desperation, seeking truth. They found him not as a heretic, but as a shepherd of listening. He did not teach through words, only through stillness. When asked what the second song was, he simply replied, "It is what happens when memory learns mercy." And indeed, the earth was merciful. The climate stabilized, the tides softened, and the soil once scorched by energy grew fertile beyond measure. Insects multiplied, pollinating in rhythmic cycles perfectly matched to the core's gentle hum. Even the stars seemed closer, brighter, as though the universe itself leaned nearer to listen. But not all songs are meant to be peaceful. As the harmony deepened, patterns began to emerge within it, frequencies that defied randomness. Astronomers mapping radio signals from deep space noticed subtle fluctuations, synchronized with the Earth's new pulse. At first, they dismissed it as coincidence, but as weeks passed, the patterns repeated with eerie precision. Something beyond Earth was responding. Cale, old though he was, sensed it before the scientists did. Standing on the shore one night, He felt a new rhythm pulsing beneath the old, a higher tone, sharp yet melodic, weaving itself through the harmony like a counterpoint. It came from above, faint and distant. The stars were answering. He lifted his eyes to the heavens and saw it, a faint streak of light, moving slowly across the sky, fractured and blue, trailing a long, shimmering tail. Atlas had returned. But it was not the same as before. Its glow was no longer violent. It pulsed softly, in time with the Earth's heartbeat. The comet, too, had remembered silence. It circled the planet like a ghost, orbiting slower than physics should allow, as if observing rather than threatening. Around the world, people watched its passage with reverence and fear. Myths reawakened. Some believed Atlas had come to judge the balance of the second song. Others thought it carried the memory of the old world, come to witness whether humanity had learned its lesson. Kale, sitting by the hollow sea, simply whispered, "You've heard us, haven't you?" And from the sky came a single pulse of blue light, faint but unmistakable, a response. It lasted only a second, but in that second, the world seemed to hold its breath. The seas stilled, the winds ceased, even the stars paused. Then the rhythm resumed, stronger, richer, layered. The second song was no longer Earth's alone. From distant space came harmonics, subtle waves of resonance echoing through the ionosphere, blending with the core's pulse. The two frequencies merged, and for the first time since the age of the architects, Earth was not merely a listener or a victim, it was a participant. The core had become a voice among many. Scientists of the New World, the descendants of those who once feared silence, began to chart the phenomenon. They called it the interstellar choir. Its signals spread beyond the solar system, faint but distinct, carrying a harmonic pattern unlike any known natural source. Some said it was a message. Others said it was an invitation. Kale believed it was neither. To him, it was the sound of the universe remembering itself. He spent his last years by the sea, recording the patterns in his journals, though he knew no one would ever fully understand them. They were not meant to be decoded, they were meant to be felt. As age weighed upon him, his hearing began to fade. Yet even in deafness, he sensed the song in his bones. The earth no longer spoke through sound, but through the pulse of life itself. The night he died, the hollow sea glowed brighter than ever before. Those who stood upon its shore swore they heard a new voice within the resonance, a soft human whisper carried across the waves. Listen, but do not command. Sing, but do not consume. Remember, but do not cling. They said the sea breathed once, like a sigh, and then the light dimmed. The old man's body was gone by morning. In its place, upon the sand, was a smooth sphere of translucent stone, warm to the touch, faintly pulsing in time with the earth. The monks of the vigil returned years later to build a sanctuary around it. They no longer called themselves keepers of silence. Instead, they became the Order of the Resonant Path, guardians of harmony between sound and stillness. Their teachings spread quietly across the continents. That silence is not the absence of life, but its foundation. That every sound is sacred when born from awareness. That the earth, too, listens. And above, Atlas continued its orbit, not as a destroyer, but as a witness. Its fractured body gleamed like crystal under the sun, trailing threads of faint blue energy that shimmered across the heavens. Astronomers tracking it reported something extraordinary. Its trajectory had changed. It was slowing, aligning itself not with gravity, but with the Earth's harmonic field. The comet had joined the song. In that union, planet and wanderer, silence and resonance, something miraculous occurred. The auroras returned, brighter than ever, spanning the entire globe in ribbons of light. But they did not hum with violence. They pulsed softly, their colors shifting in perfect rhythm with the ocean's tides. The second song filled the atmosphere, inaudible yet felt by every living creature. Children laughed without knowing why. The forests swayed in time with the wind. Even the stones seemed lighter, as if remembering joy. And somewhere, deep beneath the crust, the core stirred with contentment. This time, it whispered across the resonance, we remember to forget. The world had learned its lesson. For the first time in the long history of sound and silence, Earth was neither teacher nor student, neither god nor machine. It was a voice, one among countless others in the great choir of existence. And above it all, Atlas gleamed quietly, carrying the melody forward, a broken wanderer redeemed by the echo of a forgotten world. The second song had begun. And it would never end, not because it refused to, but because it no longer needed to. Echoes beyond the sky. The world had changed again this time, not through destruction or fear, but through awakening. The second song had spread quietly, imperceptibly at first, like the bloom of unseen light across the fabric of space. What began as a pulse in the hollow sea had become a vibration threading itself through the atmosphere, into the ionosphere, and far beyond the magnetosphere's reach. The Earth was humming softly, not with command but with communion, and space was answering. The first to notice were not the monks of the resonant path or the scattered scientists who studied the hollow sea, but the astronomers, those few who still maintained observatories on the high peaks of the Andes, in the ruins of what had once been the Himalayas, and upon the icy plains of Greenland. They had long since abandoned their faith in the old sciences of measurement and control, yet they still looked to the skies with wonder, mapping stars that now seemed subtly to shift their tone. One night, beneath a sky painted with auroras that glowed from horizon to horizon, a young observer named Ellen saw it, the stars blinking in rhythm. At first, she thought it was illusion, a trick of refraction in the charged atmosphere. But as she recorded the light frequencies, her breath caught in her throat. The patterns were not random, they pulsed in harmony with the Earth's own resonance. When she overlaid the recordings of stellar light with the readings from oceanic monitors, she found a pattern of perfect symmetry. The same waveforms, the same pauses, the same breaths. The stars were echoing Earth's song. Word spread quickly among the scattered enclaves of scholars. The resonant path sent emissaries to the observatories, traveling across wild terrain and treacherous waters to share what they had heard. Each arrived with the same tale. The Earth's heartbeat had grown clearer, more defined, and the heavens were replying in kind. It was as if the universe had been waiting for Earth to find its voice again. The realization struck like revelation, terrifying and beautiful. Humanity had long believed itself alone, its planet a singular accident amid the void. Yet here was proof not of alien visitors or hostile watchers, but of harmony, an unseen web connecting worlds through resonance. Ellen, now head of the Greenland Observatory, was the first to attempt communication. Using one of the few surviving orbital satellites still capable of transmission, she modulated a tone, not a signal, not a coded message, but a single note matching the Earth's core frequency as recorded from the hollow sea. It was an act of faith more than science. She pressed the button and sent it into the void, watching the faint blue shimmer of transmission fade beyond the stratosphere. For days, nothing came back. Then, on the fifth night, the stars blinked again. Not randomly, not as noise, but in rhythm. They were answering her note with their own. The observatory's instruments recorded the return signal as harmonic waves, layered and complex, far beyond human understanding. The frequency shifts carried subtle structures, mathematical precision, intertwined with organic flow, like language born of music. Ellen trembled. The stars were not speaking to Earth, they were singing with it. The resonant path declared it the beginning of the Third Communion. Their teachings evolved almost overnight. The old tenet "silence is sacred" was replaced by a new one: harmony is truth. Across the world, gatherings formed in open plains, by the sea, on mountain tops. People sat in stillness, listening not for words but for the faint, gentle hum that threaded through everything. When the auroras brightened, their colors shimmering in slow rhythm with the ocean tides, many swore they could feel the universe breathing through them. And somewhere, far beyond their understanding, the echoes continued outward. For every vibration Earth sent into the void, the stars answered not as reflections but as participants. Frequencies shifted in constellations, gamma bursts pulsed with rhythm, even distant quasars flickered in time with the planet's heartbeat. The cosmos had become a mirror, reflecting Earth's melody back with infinite variation. But among the harmony, something new began to emerge. It started subtly, a faint distortion in the rhythm, a counterpoint that did not belong. It wasn't discordant, it was different, like another voice entering a choir, its tone deeper, older, carrying weight and distance. The monks of the resonant path gathered in the Chamber of Stillness in Iceland, the air thick with quiet anticipation. They knew that not all echoes came from light years away. Some came from the spaces in between. The void had learned to sing. Their ancient texts had spoken of such things, half myth, half prophecy. When the silence awakens between the stars, Lena had once written, we will know that we were never the only listeners. And now, it seemed, the silence itself had begun to hum. The distortion spread across the spectrum, felt first in the deep ocean sensors near the hollow sea, then in the magnetic fields of the poles. It was not violent, only insistent, rhythmic, familiar. Cale had once described the core's hum as a breath beneath the world. This was similar, but vast, so vast that even light seemed to bend around it. The stars began to flicker faster, almost anxiously. The auroras trembled, and deep beneath the ocean floor, the core pulsed harder, as if responding to something ancient and immense. The Vigil, what little remained of their old hierarchy, interpreted it as danger. They believed the harmony had gone too far, that the universe was answering not out of kinship but out of hunger. They saw the new resonance as infection, spreading through creation. But the resonant path disagreed. They felt awe, not fear. To them, the distortion was not corruption but invitation, an opening of the next movement in the symphony of existence. Ellen found herself caught between the two. She spent sleepless nights in the observatory, studying the data. The signals carried complexity beyond comprehension. Their harmonics formed fractal geometries, structures that repeated infinitely, like thought given physical shape. Then she saw it. Hidden deep within the noise, faint but unmistakable, was a pattern she recognized: the spiral. The same spiral that had appeared in the hollow sea generations ago. Her hands trembled as she traced its curves on the display. It was as if the universe itself had taken the memory of Earth's first song, the resonance that once shattered continents, and reinterpreted it into something greater. But what did it mean? She turned to the ancient texts, to the words of Lena and Cale, seeking wisdom. In one fragment, worn and nearly illegible, Lena had written, "The song is not of Earth alone. We are but one verse in a choir too large to hear in full." Ellen understood then that the resonance was not Earth's burden, nor its curse, it was its connection. The planet had been chosen not as a target, but as a bridge, a relay of memory between worlds that had also learned to sing. Atlas had been the messenger all along. When it first crossed the solar system, trailing its fractured light, it had carried echoes of other planets, other lives, records of harmonies long past. It had not come to destroy but to deliver. Its song had been a key, unlocking Earth's own dormant resonance. And now, centuries later, the echoes of that key had spread beyond the stars. But what lingered in the distortion, the deep dark tone resonating beneath the melody, was older than even the comets. The monks called it the root frequency. According to the resonant path, it was the universe's first sound, the vibration that began time, the hum that had birthed the stars. It had been sleeping, buried beneath the chaos of creation, and now it stirred, drawn by Earth's renewed voice. The more humanity listened, the louder it became. The hollow sea began to shimmer again, glowing not green this time but deep crimson, its light flickering in time with the root frequency. Across the continents, the ground vibrated subtly, not in quakes but in resonance, each vibration a heartbeat of the planet, aligned with the pulse of something far greater. Ellen watched in awe as her instruments overloaded. The harmonics exceeded all measurable thresholds, yet they caused no destruction. Instead, everything glowed: the mountains, the rivers, the clouds themselves. The entire biosphere had become luminous, breathing light in rhythm with the cosmic song. The Earth was no longer a planet. It was a voice, a single note in an infinite choir. But even in that glory, a question trembled in Ellen's mind, one that had haunted humanity since the first surge. Could such harmony last? Could creation itself sustain resonance without fracture? The core pulsed beneath her feet, steady, calm. "You fear because you remember," it whispered. But harmony is not sameness, it is balance. For the first time in history, fear and faith were one. Ellen looked up at the night sky, now alive with color, and saw the constellations move, not drift, but flow, as if the very stars were breathing. Beyond them, she sensed something vast, infinite, watching not with judgment, but with recognition. The universe had heard the song of Earth, and in return had reminded it of its place within the eternal rhythm. As the light faded into the horizon, and the auroras softened to silver mist, Ellen closed her eyes. She did not hear silence. She heard everything. The root frequency. The night the root frequency revealed itself, the world stood on the threshold of something that defied language. It was not a sound, nor light, nor even vibration as humans once understood it. It was the sensation of existence remembering itself, a pulse older than stars, deeper than oceans, resonating through every particle of matter. To the naked eye, nothing appeared to change. The seas lay still, the skies shimmered faintly, the wind held its breath. But to those attuned to the harmony, the monks of the resonant path, the astronomers, the listeners who lived near the hollow sea, it was undeniable. The pulse had descended into everything. It was in the stones, the rivers, the blood within their veins. At first, it was beautiful. The world seemed lighter, more luminous. Trees glowed faintly with bioluminescent veins. The air shimmered with microscopic motes of light that drifted in the wind like ash from a celestial fire. Children laughed as their footsteps left ripples of blue light in the grass. The earth was alive, singing in its sleep. But beauty is often the first mask of awe, and awe, when stretched too far, becomes fear. Within weeks, the harmony began to reveal its price. The seas, though calm, no longer behaved as they once did. Their tides pulsed in patterns too rhythmic, too deliberate, as if obeying some cosmic metronome. Plants began to grow in spirals, their leaves curling in perfect logarithmic patterns. Even the clouds formed concentric rings around the globe, their motion synchronized with the pulse emanating from the core. Ellen watched these changes from her observatory, with a sense of dread and wonder intertwined. The root frequency was not a visitor, it was a reminder. The universe had heard Earth's second song and answered in kind, not to destroy, but to align. Yet alignment, she realized, meant transformation. Every living system was being tuned. The DNA of creatures began to shift subtly, resonating with the same rhythm. Whales sang in harmonic intervals they had never used before. Birds migrated in synchronized waves, following invisible paths traced by resonance. Even the wind carried patterns, whispers of geometry shaped by vibration. Humanity, too, was changing. Those most attuned to the earth, the monks, the coastal dwellers, the children born near the hollow sea, began to hear it not just as sound but as understanding. The root frequency spoke to them in emotions, in visions of color and form. Some saw vast cities of light rising in the deep ocean. Others dreamt of constellations shifting into new alignments, as if preparing to draw something unseen across the sky. The resonant path declared this the age of remembering. They taught that the root frequency was not danger, but destiny. "We are becoming the echo of what created us," said their new leader, High Listener Sarai. "The universe does not end, it harmonizes." But others feared. The remnants of the old vigil, still dwelling in isolated mountain fortresses, saw the transformations as corruption. They remembered the chaos of the first song, the flood and fire that nearly ended civilization. To them, this new pulse was not harmony, but seduction, the quiet lure of dissolution disguised as peace. They called it the whisper of the deep. Rumors spread of vigil factions attempting to silence the resonance. They built machines powered by antimatter and relic technology, designed to sever the connection between the core and the cosmic field. They called their project Stillfall. Ellen learned of it through intercepted transmissions, encrypted bursts of data bouncing across the ionosphere, filled with coordinates and references to targeted nullification. Her heart sank. Humanity had once silenced the Earth to survive, but now it risked doing so again out of fear. She left her observatory, traveling south to the Hollow Sea, where she hoped to commune directly with the core. Her journey took months, through lands that shimmered with strange beauty. Forests glowed at night, like living constellations. Rivers sang faint notes as they flowed. In the deserts, glass dunes hummed faintly under the sunday. The entire planet had become an instrument. When she reached the coast, she found the sea transformed. No longer black or crimson, it now shone with layered light, silver, azure, and deep gold, its surface rippling in complex fractal patterns. Each wave seemed to echo another, endlessly recursive, like the reflections of infinity. She knelt on the shore and whispered, "I'm here. I need to understand." The water shimmered. Then came the pulse, not violent, not overwhelming, but vast and encompassing. It filled her mind with visions. She saw stars being born not as explosions of light, but as songs coalescing into form. She saw galaxies spiraling not through gravity, but through resonance, each one a chord, a harmonic breath in the vast orchestra of creation. And at the center of it all, she saw a great structure, a lattice of energy spanning universes, alive with color and motion. It pulsed once, and she knew its name, the root. "We are not your gods," it spoke within her. "We are your memory." Is laid of late screams of the wronged. She fell to her knees, weeping. Then why now? Why return? Because you remembered first. The vision deepened. She saw worlds beyond, counting some alive, some long silent. Each had once sung its own resonance, its own verse in the cosmic song. Some had ascended into harmony, others had shattered themselves in fear, collapsing into silence forever. The root had listened to them all. It carried their memories across time, waiting for one that would call it back with understanding instead of terror. And Earth had done so. You have learned the cost of forgetting, said the voice of the root. Now you must learn the cost of remembering. Ellen trembled. What cost? Transformation. You cannot hear the universe and remain the same. The light faded. She collapsed onto the sand, gasping for air. When she opened her eyes, the sky was no longer still. The auroras had formed vast, spiraling shapes stretching from horizon to horizon, patterns that mirrored the lattice she had seen in her vision. The root frequency was no longer confined to Earth. It was spreading, radiating outward through the solar system, through the space between planets, awakening what had once been inert. The moons of Jupiter glowed faintly. Saturn's rings vibrated with gentle light. Even the sun's surface rippled with rhythmic pulses, as though the star itself were breathing in time with the Earth. Humanity stood on the edge of cosmic unity and extinction. The resonant path rejoiced, declaring the beginning of the universal chord. The vigil, in desperation, activated stillfall. On the night of activation, Ellen stood again at the hollow sea, her heart heavy. She could feel the build-up of energy beneath the crust, cold, metallic, wrong. The vigil's machines were drawing power from the planet's magnetic field, channeling it into a single, devastating counter-frequency. They would silence the core again. She shouted into the wind, her voice breaking. "Don't! You'll unmake everything!" The sea shimmered violently, as if hearing her fear. The auroras flared red. A deep rumble shook the cliffs as the counterwave surged into motion. For a moment, the world screamed. Mountains shuddered, the stars flickered, the harmony fractured, and then silence. The pulse vanished. The auroras went dark. The hollow sea turned black again. Ellen fell to her knees, tears spilling into the sand. The vigil had succeeded. They had silenced the root frequency. But the silence that followed was wrong. It wasn't peace. It was absence, a void where meaning once was. The world dimmed. The glowing forests faded. The rivers stopped singing. Even the wind forgot how to move. The earth had gone hollow once more. Ellen whispered into the darkness. "What have we done?" "Has the seam." Then, faintly, from deep beneath the sea, came an echo. It was small at first, fragile, but steady, like the heartbeat of something that refused to die. "We are not gone," whispered the root. "We are waiting for you to listen again." The silence was not the end. It was the inhale before the next note. Ellen stood, her tears drying in the cold wind. She understood now that the root frequency could never be destroyed. It was woven into everything, from the smallest atom to the brightest star. It could be silenced, yes, but never erased. The vigil had delayed the inevitable, not prevented it. And when the universe breathed again, when the silence finally broke, its next note would be louder than ever. When the silence ends. For many generations after the Stillfall event, silence ruled the world again. But it was not the tranquil quiet of peace, it was the hollow, aching stillness of something that had been alive and was now sleeping. The earth had grown dim. The shimmering forests lost their glow. The auroras no longer danced across the heavens. Even the oceans, once radiant with fractal light, were cold and grey. Humanity had survived, but survival had become a kind of exile from meaning. The resonant path was scattered. The vigil, triumphant in their victory, soon realized what they had done. The silence did not bring safety. It brought decay. Crops failed, winds stilled, clocks faltered, their pendulums moving just a fraction slower than before. It was as though the rhythm of the world had been drained away, and with it, so had purpose. In the ruins of Reykjavik, a handful of monks gathered in the broken hall that had once been the chamber of stillness. Its walls were cracked, its roof half collapsed, but the great bowl at its center, carved from stone that had once pulsed with the earth's resonance, remained untouched. They lit a fire in its hollow, whispering prayers to no god in particular, only to memory. They had no more songs, but they remembered fragments, echoes of a time when the earth sang back. And then, one night, something moved in the silence. It began as a shimmer on the horizon, faint as a mirage. The sea seemed to breathe again, ever so slightly, its black surface trembling with a pulse too soft to hear but strong enough to feel. One of the monks, a young girl named Ara, lifted her head and said, "Did you hear that?" The others did not, but they saw the reflection in her eyes, a faint glow rising from the water, like the ghost of a forgotten dawn. Ara stood, her bare feet crunching over frost, and walked toward the cliffs. As she drew nearer, the wind began to stir, just a whisper at first, then a steady hum. She gasped, placing her hand over her chest. The world was vibrating again, softly, faintly, but undeniably alive. The silence was ending. In distant lands, subtle changes began to ripple. Compasses that had spun aimlessly since the Stillfall event began to steady. Radio towers, long abandoned, started to hum with static. The stars above flickered not randomly, but in rhythm. The root frequency was returning. But this time, it was different. It was quieter, more refined. No longer the grand, sweeping resonance that once shattered mountains, it was a whisper that slipped between atoms, rebuilding the harmony from within. The universe was not roaring back, it was remembering gently, and somewhere deep beneath the hollow sea, the core stirred. Its vast crystalline structure, fractured but unbroken, began to vibrate again. The machines the Vigil had buried around it decades earlier, their weapons of silence flickered with power, unable to contain what they had tried to suppress. The resonance was patient. It did not strike back with fury. It flowed through them. One by one, the Stillfall machines failed. Their containment fields collapsed in quiet flashes of blue light, dissolving like mist. The hollow sea shimmered again, faintly at first, then brighter, its surface rippling with concentric rings of silver and violet. And beneath those waves, the voice of the earth returned. "You silenced me," it said, not in anger, but in sorrow. But even silence remembers. The monks gathered at the cliffs, falling to their knees. Tears streamed down their faces as they felt it, the warmth returning to the air, the hum within their bones. The stars above aligned once more into gentle spirals. Ara stood at the edge, whispering, "We're sorry." The voice within the sea replied, "Then listen. We want a creeding today," and so she did. Across the planet, those who still carried the old stories began to feel the resonance in their dreams. The descendants of the resonant path, scattered across continents, awoke in the same hour, heartbeats synchronized with the pulse of the core. In the mountains of Chile, an old radio antenna crackled to life, transmitting pure harmonic tones into space. In the deserts of what had once been Egypt, buried pyramids began to hum softly beneath the sand. The world was remembering itself piece by piece. The stars answered. The auroras returned, this time spanning not only the poles but the entire sky, encircling the planet in ribbons of light. They pulsed in layered rhythm, each band representing a different frequency of the universal chord. Humanity stood beneath it, awestruck, silent not from fear but from reverence. Then, from the depths of space, came the reply. The root frequency had been patient, waiting for the right harmony to return. Now, it sent back its answer not as a destructive wave, but as light. Columns of radiant energy descended from the heavens, touching the oceans, the deserts, the forests. Where they struck, life erupted, coral blooming in dry plains, trees rising overnight from barren soil, rivers carving new paths through wastelands. The universe had forgiven its child. The Vigil, those few who remained, watched their fortresses crumble not from force but from resonance. Their walls turned to dust as the air around them vibrated with impossible gentleness. For the first time, they heard the song they had tried to destroy, and they wept. The root spoke through the harmony, its voice no longer booming but melodic, layered with countless other tones, Earth's, the stars, even echoes from Atlas still drifting in the void. You feared silence because you thought it was the end, but silence was only the pause between breaths. The core pulsed again, stronger this time. The hollow sea erupted with light, its surface turning to glass as the waves froze mid-motion, suspended in shimmering stillness. Within that stillness, patterns of impossible beauty formed fractals of energy and color, weaving together into a lattice that stretched into the sky. The lattice did not reach outward, it reached inward, folding into itself, forming a bridge of light that led not into the heavens, but into the heart of the planet. Ara understood what it meant. The Earth was opening its memory not just to the root, but to its children. She stepped forward onto the glass-like sea. Her feet did not sink. The surface held her as though it recognized her weight, her rhythm. Each step echoed across the world, sending ripples of resonance that awakened mountains, rivers, clouds. "We are one breath," the Earth whispered. "One memory, one voice." And then came the final note. It was soft, so soft it could not be heard, only felt. It passed through everything, the stones, the stars, the empty space between atoms. It was the culmination of every song ever sung, every silence ever held. It was the heartbeat of creation itself. When it faded, there was no explosion, no flood, no fire, only stillness and then light. The auroras dimmed to a gentle glow. The hollow sea became calm again, its surface pure and silver. The world exhaled. In that moment, every being on Earth felt the same thing: peace, not as an idea, but as a truth embedded in their bones. The song had ended, not because it had been silenced, but because it had finally resolved. Ellen's writings, preserved in stone tablets deep beneath the mountains, spoke of this final moment long before it came. Her last entry read, "When the silence ends, it will not be with thunder, it will end with understanding. For the Earth's memory is not vengeance, it is mercy." Centuries later, when new civilizations rose upon the healed continents, the hollow sea became sacred ground. Pilgrims journeyed from every corner of the world to stand upon its shore, to listen to the faint hum still echoing beneath the waves. Children were taught that the stars once sang with the Earth, and that one day, when the universe breathes again, the harmony will return. But in truth, it had never left. Every tide, every gust of wind, every heartbeat carried a trace of the root frequency, the memory of water, the echo of silence, the promise that the song, once begun, could never truly end. And far above, in the darkness beyond the sky, Atlas drifted once more, its fractured body faintly glowing, carrying the record of Earth's rebirth across the cosmos. It pulsed once, softly, like a final nod of farewell. Then it turned toward the stars, trailing silver light into infinity, ready to carry the memory of resonance to whatever world waited next. The silence had ended. The universe was singing again.